He was the most powerful mage in the world and master of the greatest magic tower. When the demon army invaded, he went down like a legend, sacrificing himself to obliterate the demon king. However, 20 years later, he wakes up as a simple level 1 mage, right inside his old tower. The place once filled with ultimate geniuses is now completely bankrupt and on the verge of shutting down. Now he will use his absolute knowledge to rebuild his magical empire from scratch. But before we dive in, make sure to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and let's get into it. The story begins with a man kneeling on the ground, begging for someone to answer. Using his magic on the earth, he pleads that if there are any survivors, to please respond, and if they can't speak, to move or at least try to make a sound. He cries out, begging that please, someone has survived. But he realizes that in the end, there is no one, and he is the only survivor. He stares at the head of a certain man. This man was the one who united the demons for the first time, and by leading them, brought humanity to destruction. He was the high priest. These guys were so cruel that not even little children escaped. The white-haired man says something in another language. In that instant, a little baby is freed from the demons and starts moving away from them. It is said that in the war against the demons who came from the demonic realm, he and the mages of the White Tower who followed him put everything on the line for the future of humanity. It was a grand battle of demons against humans. If it wasn't for them, no one would have done it, but unfortunately it came to an end. Someone approaches that guy and says that the day is April 28th at 3:12 in the afternoon. She confirms the death of the high priest. The man asks if this is Edna. She is the last dragon in the world and the observer who records history, Edna Solaplas. She calls him the master of the magic tower and says she has good and bad news. He asks to start with the bad ones. She says that as expected, the demonic army invaded the White Tower. In the process, most of the mages died, the magic tower was partially destroyed, and the mages and research resources were almost all incinerated. He asks what the good news is. She says that the Imperial forces arrived earlier than expected, so they were able to save some survivors, including his disciples. He says that at least that is a relief. She asks if he regrets his choice, but he says no. Each person was someone he personally selected and brought there with him, and he can't say he regrets that choice in front of them. She asks if he has anything else to say, since she noticed he is at the end of his life. He just asks her to check on his disciples from time to time. They are still very young, so he is sure they are nervous. She says she will check on them occasionally. He, quite surprised, asks if he is really seeing a dragon bowing to a mere human. She says he has the right to receive this reverence and that the continent and she will never forget the sacrifice the heroes of the White Tower made. He says that's good, and that of course that would be the case. However, he thinks it would be a lie to say he has no regrets. He might have been the best mage, but he wasn't a good leader. If he simply had another chance, even if he were called a villain, he would have lived a selfish life taking care of his disciples. Those 3 little kids. That was the kind of life he wanted to live. After he dies, the dragon closes her eyes and announces that on April 28th at 1:47 in the afternoon, she confirms the death of the master of the magic tower, Oscar Sage. In history, it was recorded that the high priest was killed. 132 level 6 mages, 19 level 7 mages, and 2 level 8 mages from the White Tower were killed in combat. And the master of the White Magic Tower, a level 9, Oscar Sage, was also killed in combat. Now, in a somewhat distant future inside the White Tower, a young man is watching over a patient to take care of him. Except, as soon as a leaf touches the kid's hand, he simply wakes up startled, which really scares the other guy. He says that now he is all wet and will have to change the towel. He says the kid's sleeping habits are disgusting, and that he has been taking care of him all this time without even getting a thank you. The kid asks what he is talking about and wonders if he himself had been sleeping. But that couldn't have happened without him casting any defense magic over himself. The most important thing is that he should have died, and he doesn't understand why his heart is beating and he is still alive. He is certain the high priest pierced his heart with a sword. He is about to ask that guy what happened, but right then someone enters the room very angry, asking if he woke up. The young man starts holding him back, telling the elder to calm down. But this elder tells him to get out of the way, calling him Frank, and says he has already ignored him several times, but now he is going to make sure to beat this kid. To the surprise of both, the kid asks how he is still alive. The elder says he also finds it fascinating that he is still alive. The kid says that judging by his robe, he is a mage of the White Tower, and asks him to explain the situation in detail. The two wonder what the hell is wrong with his head. The elder, trembling with anger, asks what he means by explain, and if he is going crazy. He moves to slap him in the face, saying he really should reflect on the situation he is in, and beg for forgiveness. Thus, the kid realizes an attack is coming his way, and wonders if there are demon assassins planted there. He activates the wind shield, where a dome instantly forms to block the hand, knowing that the fist that hits the wind will bend like straw. In the middle of the attack, he thinks the elder is a low-level weakling who doesn't even think before attacking. Except, to the kid's surprise, his shield disappeared. He wonders what is going on, and what kind of pathetic magic this is. The elder says that wind shield was pretty good, and apparently he wasn't just relaxing all this time. He says he will postpone the disciplinary action regarding the embezzlement of research fees, so the kid should focus and recover for now. Frank just tells him to keep a low profile, while turning to the kid and asking if he is crazy. The kid, trembling, wonders how his windshield disappeared out of nowhere and how long he has been asleep. Frank says he already knows how Elder Max's Maxim's personality is, and that he is acting a bit weird today. The kid keeps wondering why his mana circles, their quantity and purity are absolute crap, and what kind of body this is. He asks Frank what day it is. The guy says it's September 21st and that he was in a coma. The kid asks if he slept for 5 months. Frank questions what he is talking about and says it was at most 1 day. The kid says that, whatever it is, send for Lloyd. If he isn't there, he should call Gilly or Shasa to hear from them exactly what happened. Frank asks what he means and tells him to forget those traitors. He also questions why the kid is saying the Tower Master's name informally. The kid asks what he means by traitors. Frank asks if he forgot that Lloyd and Gilead Dominic stole a high-level magic book and ran away. The kid, somewhat pissed, asks how he dares to say that. Frank stares at him quite surprised. The kid realizes there is no vibration of a lie around him and, apparently, he isn't lying. He asks if Shasa is the master of the magic tower. Frank confirms that yes. The kid wonders how a 5-year-old could become the master of the tower and why he left out another 20 years. He wonders what is going on and thinks some people have an incredible imagination. He doesn't understand why Frank is getting so mad at a kid who is just a novice, but thinks that for a prank, the acting is quite natural. But then, looking out the window, he notices his reflection and wonders who this guy is. A few days later, he says he can't believe it even after seeing it. That right there is 20 years after he died. This place has really developed a lot. The shiny things are called streetlights, and that thing is a car. This is all thanks to the evolution of magical engineering. They would have loved to see this. Back when the world was collapsing, there were only people with eyes that had lost all hope. But he decides to stop dwelling on the past and organize everything he found out about the owner of this body. Oscar Crushen was chosen by the White Tower at 10 years of age. Now he is 20 and a level 1 mage from a fallen noble family. He even has a pretty face, but as a mage he is terrible. Being just a level 1 at 20 years old, perhaps he felt pressured and embezzled the research funds to buy an illegal elixir. After he took it, he passed out. Which makes sense, because if it had been successful, it would have multiplied his mana quantity many times over. But when it fails, your life is in danger, which is why it's illegal. Frank said he was in a coma for a whole day after taking it. Honestly, this guy should have died from the mana explosion. But then he starts checking his body and wonders what the hell that is. He has way too much mana for a level 1 mage, and most of it is pure mana that hasn't been refined yet. He wonders if perhaps that's what he got from that illegal elixir, but he notices something strange amidst that mana and wonders what that is coming straight to his finger. After it comes out, the liquid falls to the floor. He is very surprised to see that it was actually poison. He doesn't understand why there is poison in this kid's body, but then he thinks he understands and has a slight idea of the situation he is in now. First, that illegal elixir was definitely a fake, since a decent elixir would normally be impossible to buy, even for an exorbitant price. The problem is that Oscar Crushen didn't know there was poison in it. After considering how much poison was left and the time it took for him to pass out, he is certain of one thing. In other words, he didn't die from a mana explosion, but from poisoning. The poison's level is way too high to have been used on a level 1 mage. If it hadn't been for him, it would have been hard to find any trace of it. Confident, he thinks that whoever did this doesn't know they are messing with his soul. As a consequence, he received a second chance, which is what he was thinking about before he died. Having a selfish life just for himself and his protégés isn't bad for the start of this life. He tells Oscar Crushen that, as payment for borrowing his body, he will avenge him. Now on the outskirts of Siren, inside a mansion, an underling approaches another man and says he has news from the shop. The man demands to be called boss and asks how many times he has to repeat that. The underling apologizes and reports that the shop was blown up from the inside and destroyed by water magic. The boss, furious, asks who dared to do that. The henchman says the invader seemed to be looking for the person who sent him the elixir, suggesting it might have been Oscar Crushen. The boss questions how that would be possible, since Oscar is only a theoretical mage. Furthermore, he points out that someone nearly dying from an elixir wouldn't be able to defeat his men. The henchman asks if the magic tower might decide to investigate the case. The boss retorts, asking if he forgot who ordered them to do that to Oscar. The client was wearing the ring of the White Tower, indicating that whoever commissioned the job was a mage from the institution itself. To their surprise, a voice asks who knows, and what kind of idiot would be so obvious about their affiliation. When they look, they realize it is the boy. They ask what Oscar is doing there. The protagonist thinks to himself that he followed the scent left on the bottle, and notes that more people are involved than he imagined. The boss asks if he was the one who actually destroyed the shop. Oscar confirms it and says he is interested in their conversation, asking them to keep talking. The boss, annoyed, simply orders him killed. The henchman agrees and charges at Oscar with his sword. Oscar warns that if they are going to play this game he won't hold back, and activates the windblade magic. The henchman passes by him without landing a strike, and in an instant his head is decapitated. Seeing the head on the floor, Oscar can barely believe he did that so easily. The leader starts screaming for his friend, calling him Bart. He curses Oscar, draws a firearm, asks how he dares to do that, and shoots several times slams at the boy. Oscar finds the weapon interesting and once again activates the wind shield. He notices he can't detect any mana in the attack and wonders what principle is used to produce all that power. The thug asks how he managed to stop the projectiles. Oscar asks if those are so-called bullets and says that as interesting as the weapon is, he will return them for now. The bullets fly back and hit the shooter's arm, leg, and stomach. The man falls to the ground, cursing him as a bastard. Oscar coldly agrees and warns that his subordinates won't be coming back anytime soon, as all sounds in that room are suppressed. The criminal asks how a level 1 mage is capable of using the silence spell, which is a level 5 magic. Oscar explains that he used a soundbind spell. He simply trapped any sound inside that room so it wouldn't leak outside. The deal now is for the man to answer his questions. Oscar demands to know who ordered that hit on him. The man refuses to speak but immediately receives a kick to the face. Oscar, irritated, asks if his pride is more valuable than his own life and calls him a mediocre thug. Unleashing his power over the enemy, the man's body begins to suffer the effects of the magic, and he screams in pain. Oscar thinks that by channeling the wind directly into the enemy's body, the sensation must be like thousands of needles piercing him internally. The boy warns that he doesn't like torturing people because it makes too much noise, and tells him to start talking at once. Crying in pain, the man says he will tell everything, and begs him to stop. Oscar ceases the attack and asks him to reveal who his employer is. The villain explains they received a fake elixir along with money, with orders to sell the potion to the boy at a very low price, and that he didn't feel he had the right to refuse the offer. Oscar asks what the person looked like. The man replies that the employer wore a hood over his head, preventing him from seeing his face, but he flaunted the ring of the White Tower. Oscar accepts the answer and asks what else he knows, suspecting the ring might just be a disguise. The criminal says the person had a unique scent, a clean and refreshing smell of mint, and that was all he knew. Oscar is intrigued by the information about the mint scent. Oscar asks how the man intended to deal with the consequences after trying to assassinate him. The thug replies that the White Tower is entirely occupied with the evaluation of the 4 main magic towers, so he didn't believe they would conduct a real investigation. Oscar doesn't understand and asks what evaluation of the 4 magic towers he is talking about. The criminal finds this strange and says Oscar should know this better than him. Oscar makes up an excuse, saying he forgot everything after taking the elixir. The man points to a drawer and says he will hand over the documents regarding the matter. After retrieving the papers, he gives them to Oscar, claiming they are the most relevant files. Oscar starts reading all of them, starting with the information about the White Tower. The documents state that April 28th will be designated as the White Night Festival, as it was the day the High Priest died. The Emperor commutes Oscar Sage's sacrifice by granting great benefits to the tower, including a 30-year tax exemption. However, among all the magical factions, the White Tower produced the worst results last year. The White Tower, which lost everything 20 years ago, hasn't been able to rise again since then. There will be an important announcement from the imperial family at this year's White Night Festival. Professionals point out the lack of advanced magic in the institution, questioning if the tower really lost that knowledge. Oscar remembers handing over research documents to Edna precisely to prevent something like this from happening. The text also reports that the White Tower had the worst economic results. Oscar orders the man to talk about the businesses the magic towers currently control. The boss explains that the Yellow Tower of the East, focused on lightning magic, opened a great era of magical engineering, contributing to the creation of revolutionary items, such as street lights and cars. The Indigo Tower of the South contributed to the production of drinking water, agriculture, and potions. The Red Tower, located in the Western Desert, joined the military squads and focuses on monster subjugation missions. Oscar asks what the White Tower's business is. The man replies that the White Tower makes deliveries. This shocks Oscar, who doesn't understand what kind of delivery service this would be, and asks the man to explain better. The criminal says that, considering the White Tower's routes and the wind riders they possess, the faction has a great advantage in delivering items quickly and safely. Oscar questions what these wind riders are. He remembers that the mages of the White Tower flew high in the sky and controlled the winds, something seen as a symbol of freedom and bravery. Because of this, they were often compared to eagles and dragons. Oscar asks who approved such a ridiculous business. The man replies that, as far as he knows, it was the current master of the Magic Tower. Oscar realizes that the master forced the young mages themselves to work with this, but decides to change the subject. He asks about the drinking water and agriculture industry, questioning if potions wouldn't be the biggest source of profit for a magic tower, and why the Indigo Tower doesn't focus solely on that. The criminal explains that the Indigo Tower is a special case, as they practically hold a monopoly on the potion market. Oscar thinks that, 20 years ago, that position belonged to the White Tower. If the potion creation methods hadn't been burned down, his tower wouldn't be in that situation. The man continues his explanation, saying the agriculture and drinking water industry consists of selling clean water at high prices and making money by bringing rain to drought areas. Oscar asks why people would buy clean water, and the man answers that it's the new craze among the rich lately. Oscar comments that the towers are acting like clowns just to make some extra cash, since at the end of the day, all they had to do was drink well water. Oscar reflects that the White Tower hasn't been able to keep up with profits compared to the other institutions. The truth is that the other magic towers are on another financial level. The White Night Festival, which will take place this year, is the White Tower's last chance to prove itself useful. The problem is time, as there are only 7 months left. The criminal calls out to him and says his body can't take it anymore. Oscar realizes the man is dying due to shock and excessive blood loss. For a moment, the boy thinks the enemy provided him with good information and wonders if he should spare his life. However, upon starting to read another document, he sees the guy's extensive criminal record, including arson, harassment, fraud, extortion, and mercenarism. Oscar concludes that the man is practically walking human garbage. The criminal starts begging for his life, but the boy simply jumps out the window and leaves him to die. As he leaves, Oscar only wishes mentally that the man becomes a better person in his next life. The next morning, Oscar goes to his room exhausted. He can barely believe he got so tired just from using basic spells the night before. He wonders what is wrong with that body. In his current state, he tries to cast the magic that made Oscar Sage the greatest mage in history, the Wind Archive. He begins to cast the spell, but the magic soon dissipates. Apparently, he still isn't capable of using it and realizes he needs to understand his own body first. So, he decides to perform a deep magical scan. While the spell scans him, he takes the opportunity to read more information about the original owner of that body. Oscar notes that his original memories are a mess, and even with the information Frank gave him, it is crucial to know everything about Oscar Crushen to be able to save that body. Reading the documents, he discovers that the boy was the heir to Count Crushen and the sole survivor of a disastrous fire at the family mansion. The members of the magical world recognized Oscar's genius from a very early age. Expectations for him were so high that the magic towers fought each other to recruit him. During the 6 years he attended the Empire's Magic Academy, he got nothing but perfect grades. With the publication of an extraordinary thesis, he proved without a doubt that he was a genius. Oscar wonders why, with all this history, the boy was still stuck at level 1 magic. He concludes that this block was the real reason for the young man's sadness. If it hadn't been for the supposed mana deficiency syndrome, Oscar Crushen would have been a great mage capable of representing his generation. Upon reading about the syndrome, the protagonist widens his eyes and wonders how the boy could have a mana deficiency. If the diagnosis were true, the fact that he was stuck at level 1 would make perfect sense. Crushen understood magic theory better than anyone. The problem was that his body simply couldn't cast it. At that moment, he realizes the magical scan has finished. Upon confirming the spell's results, he is shocked by what he sees in the boy's body. The scan reveals that Oscar Crushen doesn't suffer from any mana deficiency or illness. The truth is that someone intentionally sealed his magical circuits. It is said that mana deficiency syndrome, as the name suggests, is a disease that prevents a mage from circulating or accumulating magic. A mage can install up to 20 circuits, in addition to their own natural mana circuit, and the number of physical circuits installed will determine their level. However, if they have mana deficiency syndrome, their entire environment is destabilized. Even if they train their whole life, they won't be able to surpass level 3. He thinks that despite this, Oscar Crushen's situation is different. His physical circuit isn't tangled up by a disease, but rather because someone tied it up on purpose. He wonders if the kid was really a genius, because if he was, he would know he didn't suffer from mana deficiency syndrome. It would be very useful if he had left some kind of written diary. According to Frank, he was an alcoholic, but what if that was just a mask he created to protect himself? If he knew someone had blocked his circuit and was trying to kill him, maybe he acted like an irresponsible noble on purpose. If that were the case, it would make sense for him to give in to the temptation of taking that illegal trash. In a situation where he couldn't trust anyone, he needed power to undo the chains on his own. In contrast, now he only needed to untie the knot, and he is certain he'll be able to do it. Reading through the records, he notices a different book titled Reinterpretation of Basic Magic. He starts reading the book, which is full of notes, and is very surprised. One of the pages says that the trajectory of the wind blade attack is too boring, but it can be supplemented by the wind shield. This type of defense magic has thousands of advantages, and the main one is that the advanced wind shield can be used as a form of attack. The book explains that the equipment called a firearm is perfect to be reinterpreted with the White Tower's magic, using circulating bullets as a base. He then realizes that the concept behind the advanced wind shield described there is very similar to his own, but different from the rigid idea that it could only be used defensively. The boy also wrote in detail how he could improve these spells depending on the situation, in addition to documenting several other basic magics he created himself. He reflects that Oscar Crushen couldn't use magic, but even so, all his imaginary experiments worked perfectly in theory. Now he understands why the boy was called a genius, as they are very similar when it comes to interpreting magical theory. Furthermore, just looking at that book, it is clear that the boy didn't give up on his magic, but instead worked harder than anyone else, showing an undeniable passion. On the last page it was written that he hoped that book would serve to bring the breath of the winds back toward the White Tower. These ideas were left by a mage who was about to face his greatest challenge. Upon reading that last sentence, he realizes that the boy knew everything but had to deal with it all alone. Oscar Crushen, the great young mage, didn't give up because of his cruel destiny, but walked silently on his own path. Thus he swears, in the name of Oscar Sage, the 17th master of the White Tower, that he will untie the knot the boy couldn't. He begins trying to undo the block, while also swearing that he will make those who broke the boy's wings pay for what they did. The next morning, he heads toward the tower's greenhouse. He wonders why he is walking there, remembering that he went to sleep exhausted from studying so much about how to undo the knot in his physical circuit. To his surprise, he hears a voice calling him master. It is a memory from the time time when he was still Oscar Sage, together with his 3 disciples, telling them that today's class would be held there. He realizes he now understands what is happening. This vision is due to the dream curse of the Nightmare Viscount from the demonic world. Because of that bastard's curse, every time he sleeps, he is forced to relive the past. Honestly, he thought the curse would vanish when he possessed that body, but it seems it is bound to his soul. Still, he considers himself lucky, as his dreams with his students haven't been tainted yet, and aren't just emotional pastimes. In the middle of the class in the past, Oscar asks the 3 what they learned that day. The little white-haired boy answers what he had said he would teach them, about the magic system. The mage system, just like the knight system, is divided into 4 categories, the so-called 4 magical archetypes. Oscar confirms, explaining that magic might look the same visually, but it is actually categorized into enhancement, acceleration, equilibrium, or special. The little boy asks if the White Tower is the equilibrium type. He is Lloyd Schultz, 9 years old. The master confirms it, as wind magic suits them perfectly. The little girl, who is Shasha Maist, asks if each magic tower has its own preference. He says yes, because each type of magic has different characteristics. The Golden Tower believes speed is the most important thing, so they use acceleration magic. The Red Tower prefers fire, representing enhancement magic. The Blue and White Towers, on the other hand, are the equilibrium type. The little blonde boy Gilead, 7 years old, tells his master that he wants to use acceleration magic, because slow things make him angry. The master explains to Gilead that, unfortunately, he can't choose his type, as a mage is born with their aptitude. Shasha then asks what their type is. Oscar says it's simpler than they think, and asks Shasha to extend her index finger and try to use magic. She says it's her first time trying to cast a spell, so it would take a little while. When she succeeds, she announces that something is coming out. Oscar observes that the wind isn't very fast or lethal, and since it is balanced, she is the equilibrium type. She asks if it's the same type as his, and upon hearing that it is, she gets very happy. Gilead decides to try his magic too, and Oscar notes that the boy is the acceleration type, which makes Gilead extremely excited. When he asks Lloyd to try, the boy casts his magic and a flower appears. Oscar announces that Lloyd is the special type. Lloyd gets a little insecure and asks if there is a way to change the type that was already chosen. Oscar explains that special types are extremely rare and only 0.2% of mages have this aptitude, questioning why he would want to change. Lloyd says he would rather be the equilibrium type, just like his master. Oscar asks what he should do then, since he planned to give Lloyd the most private lessons because he is a special type, but now maybe he should research how someone can change their own type. Lloyd immediately changes his mind, getting very excited and asking if he will really have more private lessons with him. Oscar laughs and says of course, because special type mages are the hardest to evolve, especially without a dedicated teacher. Lloyd agrees, saying he doesn't think the idea is bad, as long as the master promises to give him the most lessons. Oscar accepts the promise, while the protagonist, watching that memory, realizes that his nickname back in the day was exactly the Man of Promises. He feels a deep sadness upon realizing that, no matter how mature Lloyd tried to seem, he was still just a child. In the morning, he wakes up again, with the system transmitting the information to go straight to laboratory 4202. As soon as he goes up the elevator, he notices that there are still other physical circuits blocked, but he has already managed to unlock 12 out of 20. Additionally, during the unlocking process, he gained 2 mana lines and advanced to level 2. Upon entering the room, Elder Maxim asks how he is feeling, commenting that, according to Frank, his memories are recovering. Oscar confirms, and the Elder says that's good. The protagonist thinks to himself that Elder Maxim was actually his junior. Maxim Bisk, now 45 years old, entered the Magic Tower many years after him, but now he already holds the position of Elder. In the past, Maxim was diligent and someone Oscar expected to have a great future. He always followed him around, calling him senior, and later started calling him master of the Magic Tower, which Oscar found cute. He realizes that Maxim worked hard, and that the magic around him is now complete, reflecting his age and experience. The Elder finds it strange and asks why he is smiling, and then informs him that the head of the Gordon family and the current family head have died. This surprises the boy, and the Elder asks if he has anything to say about the matter. Oscar says no, but states he is certain they died for a good reason, since they tried to assassinate him. The Elder is shocked. Oscar reveals that the elixir was poisoned, and that this was the commission for the assassination. The Elder understands that this was why he was bedridden on the verge of death. Oscar explains that he went to talk to them, but when they tried to kill him again, he had no choice. He hands over the records containing the terms of the mercenary contract and the money involved, proving that everything was legal. The Elder analyzes the documents, says he understands the situation, and that he will consider the incident as self-defense. Oscar thanks him and asks if he could ask for a favor. He would like to meet the master of the Magic Tower. The Elder warns him that this will be very difficult, despite knowing that the boy frequently discussed magic with her in the past. Oscar finds it strange and wonders if he really used to discuss magic with Shasha. Maxim says he will only be able to meet her in 6 months, at best. Oscar questions the reason, thinking that this deadline falls well after the start of the White Night Festival. The Elder explains that she went on a business trip to take care of an important commission. Oscar doesn't understand why the Tower Master would be doing something so trivial, and wonders why a high mage would need to be absent to personally attend this kind of event. He apologizes for being rude, but asks what the current level of the Tower Master is. says. Maxim replies that she is a level 7 high mage. Oscar pretends to understand, but inside he is disappointed, thinking that at her age he was already at level 9, while Shasha got stuck at level 7. Considering her talent, she should be at least level 8. The elder changes the subject and comments that the report said the cross-section cut on the enemy's bodies was very well done, asking if Oscar had been practicing attack magic. The boy lies, saying he trained a lot. The elder accepts the excuse and tells him to leave. After the boy leaves the room, an old man enters, and Maxim asks what the vice master is doing there. The old man says he came to ask him not to be so strict with the child, but notices he arrived too late. That is Hamel Glimwitz, the vice master of the White Tower. The elder defends himself, saying he needed to be tough to prevent the boy from getting into more trouble. The old man agrees he is right, but confesses he is worried, since he was the one who brought Oscar to the tower. Maxim reflects that, even though it was basic magic, Oscar couldn't have perfected a cut like that with only 2 days of hard work. He concludes the boy must have been studying it in secret for some time, and mentions to the vice master that the brat might be working much harder than they thought. The old man is pleased with the news and warns Maxim that he needs to go to the elders' meeting, as Elder Fidelina is already waiting for him. Meanwhile, on the 10th floor, the protagonist decides to visit the place because he saw his students in the dream, but finds the area empty. Suddenly, an old man approaches from behind and greets him as young Oscar. The boy asks who he is, and the man introduces himself as Itter, the manager of the Magic Tower's facilities. Itter comments that it seems the rumors about Oscar losing his memory are true, since they used to talk quite frequently. Oscar asks how many people already know about this rumor. The old man says he isn't sure. The boy then asks why he called him young Sir Oscar. Itter explains that he already worked there when the former tower master was alive, and that he was the great Sir Oscar. The boy is surprised, and the old man says he found this way to differentiate them, and will continue using the term from now on. Itter asks if, despite the memory loss, he can still continue being his conversation partner. Oscar says yes, but the old man immediately backs down, thanking him for the offer, and warning that it will be difficult, as he will be leaving the tower soon. The news shocks the boy. Itter shares that he has worked at the tower for 40 years. Oscar asks what the problem is. The old man explains that he served 3 different masters during his stay, and that the other employees changed several times, leaving him as the sole survivor in the department. The main reason he stayed so long was because of the former master, Sir Oscar Sage. Itter recalls that during his appointment ceremony, the master told them that all residents were necessary and that they should live with the pride of being part of the White Tower. The old man admits it might seem like empty words to some, but since that day, he worked believing he was an essential member of the tower. Oscar replies firmly that they weren't empty words, but the pure truth. The old man thanks him, but sighs, saying that, unfortunately, it is because of the tower's current situation that he will have to leave. The boy doesn't understand and asks for an explanation. Itter says the White Tower isn't doing very well financially. Oscar asks if the problem is the long service award, remembering that all tower members, excluding the mages, were supposed to receive a medal and a generous monetary compensation upon completing 20 and 40 years of service. The old man confirms, explaining that the current White Tower can't afford to pay his reward. To settle the debt with him, many mages would have to risk their lives on dangerous commissions, and he refuses to accept that. Itter says emotionally that, no matter what people say, that place is his second home. The boy realizes the tower's situation is even worse than he imagined. He had judged the Indigo Tower for doing bizarre things for money, but now he reflects, who is he to judge someone else's work? Thanks to that money, Indigo is now the best. He, on the other hand, only has pompous titles like War Hero and Savior of Humanity, which are honorable but useless if the tower can't even pay the reward of someone who watched over the place for decades. The boy snaps out of his thoughts with old Itter asking why he is clenching his fists so tightly. Oscar relaxes his hands and asks when he plans to leave. The old man says it will be in 2 weeks. After having his hand bandaged by him, the boy says he hopes to continue being his colleague and states with conviction that the old man won't need to leave. Oscar promises he will handle the situation so that he can stay. In his mind, the boy swears he will find a method to make a lot of money and ensure that things like this never happen in the White Tower again. After saying that, he returned to his office thinking about his own words. He is faced with the problem of not knowing what he will do to get money. At the moment, the only options that come to mind are research, lectures, or commissions. However, a delay in payment would be a huge problem. Furthermore, he is currently only a level 2 mage, and he needs a business that will yield a lot of money quickly. He concludes that potion production is the only viable way out. While reading the newspaper, something common in the news catches his attention, and he wonders what that means. In the tower's vice master's room, the elder in charge of finances, Fidelina, is very irritated. She states that this time they cannot ignore the situation, as it involves embezzlement of money. The elder retorts saying she is mistaken, but Fidelina questions how she could be wrong. The elder defends Oscar, saying the culprit is already reflecting on his actions. Seething with anger, she argues that stealing is a habit that only gets worse with time, and that they simply cannot let it pass. He counters that there isn't much to steal from the tower anyway. This makes her even more furious, and she accuses him of just talking back to everything she says. Fidelina demands that the boy be thrown into solitary confinement immediately. The elder refuses, refuses, questioning what the point would be of putting a novice level 1 mage into isolation training. Watching from behind, the Vice Master mentally wonders if these two are really the elders of a magic tower. Elder Maxim supports the argument, saying that isolation would be excessive and nothing more than torture for the boy. Fidelina questions this stance, and Maxim explains that instead he will make Oscar personally pay 3 times the amount of the research fees he used. She complains that charging only 3 times the amount is too little, but Maxim ends the subject and asks to move on to the next topic of the meeting. Fidelina warns that they are short on money and will need to make a drastic decision soon. She suggests that since there are many unused facilities, they should sell the equipment from the potion production chamber. According to her, with that money, they would be able to survive for the next 3 months. Otherwise, they would face real bankruptcy. Maxim vehemently disagrees and says he cannot allow the sale. He argues that this is the magic tower, the place where mages gather to study magic and share knowledge. To the surprise of the three, someone knocks on the door and walks right in. The boy announces himself as Oscar Crushin and says he has something important to tell them. The Vice Master asks what it is about. Oscar says he has a suggestion and asks, please, that they allow him to start a business in there. The request surprises the elder, who mocks him, calling him funny. She reminds him that a few days ago he embezzled research money and now suddenly wants to start a business. She prepares to continue insulting him, but Oscar ignores her completely. He addresses the leaders and tells them he found an article in the old newspapers stating that the city of Vince had to go into lockdown due to a terrible flu epidemic. The Vice Master confirms he also saw the news and comments that people are starting to say it must be the Cadena flu, which would be terrible news if true. Currently, there is no known cure for this flu. In the past, the White Tower managed to create a vaccine and solve the problem, but the recipe was lost 20 years ago. Oscar agrees and adds that not even the Indigo Tower, which currently dominates the potion market, has been able to replicate the formula. That is exactly what he wants to start with. Oscar announces he wants to sell the vaccine for the Cadena flu, which leaves the three in shock. He states that this was something the White Tower dominated in the past, and that now he wants to revive that monopoly. Elder Fidelina cuts the boy off, saying it isn't worth listening to him. She points out that all the magic towers and pharmaceutical companies invested a lot of money and hard work into it, and no one was able to replicate the vaccine lost 2 decades ago. Annoyed, she asks how a 20-year-old boy thinks he can replicate something of that level. Oscar turns to her and says that they all failed, and that he is in fact a 20-year-old boy. However, he adds, asserting that he is a genius. The statement makes her even more furious. She screams, reminding him that he embezzled 723,000 bells from the last research fee, and even took an extra 25,000 bells just to buy an illegal miracle drug. She sarcastically asks where the genius is in that. The Vice Master, however, tells Fidelina to stop. He warns her that Oscar is there suggesting an official investment opportunity as a mage of the White Tower. He acknowledges that she is in charge of finances, but tells her she is being too rude. Fidelina backs down and apologizes. Oscar thinks to himself that he previously didn't understand why she hated him so much, but now it makes sense. As the treasurer, she is frustrated because he hasn't done anything useful in the last 2 years. He takes the floor again, states that he is certain about what he is saying, and asks that please they at least consider his proposal. He mentally reflects that he and the former owner of that body are different people. The Vice Master asks if he has any concrete reason to be so sure that it is the Cadena flu. Oscar confirms and asks the old man to read page 2 of the newspaper. The Vice Master reads that Archbishop Baldwin of the El Terra Order suddenly changed his plans while on pilgrimage. Oscar points out that yes, he will stay in Siren for a month under the excuse of prayers and blessings, and asks if that doesn't sound strange. Until now, he had only stayed a full month in the big cities. It is known that the El Terra Order worships the Earth Mother and has only 7 archbishops. As leaders of the order, they should be incorruptible and dignified, but reality is quite far from that. In order to become cardinals, the second most powerful position in the order, they need a massive amount of campaign funds. Oscar explains that an archbishop is allowed to stay for at least a month on an estate during his pilgrimage, but this only happens when he is visiting nobles and merchants to receive money from them. He questions the stop in Siren, arguing that the city might have been large in the past, but is getting smaller and less relevant. Maxim agrees that the observation makes sense, but Fidelina still thinks the reason is genuinely for prayers and blessings. Oscar retorts that this is exactly why the situation is even stranger. He asks why the archbishop would offer prayers and blessings to a desolate land. He details that the order's pilgrimage route had already been chosen and passed through Siren, Mosque, Melbourne, Grewell, and after that the city of Vince. The archbishop had already stayed a month in Knox before heading to Siren. If Oscar is not mistaken, he will stay a month in Mosque and another in Melbourne. He asks if it isn't obvious that the archbishop is trying to delay his visit to the city of Vince as much as possible. The realization surprises the 3 leaders. Oscar continues, explaining that if an accident or unfortunate incident occurred during the pilgrimage, the people of the El Terra Order would say he enraged the Earth Goddess. That would basically be a death sentence for an archbishop trying to be promoted to cardinal. Maxim understands and concludes that Archbishop Baldwin knew the epidemic in the city of Vince was the Cadena flu, and that is why he is delaying the visit until the outbreak subsides. Oscar confirms that this is exactly how he interpreted the situation. Fidelina praises him, acknowledging that he is very good at reading between the lines, something expected of a theoretical mage, but emphasizes that, for now, it is all just theory. The Vice Vice Master says he understands the boy's plan. Oscar directly asks if he will support him. The old man replies that they won't be able to sponsor him officially. Oscar doesn't understand and asks the reason. The Vice Master explains that if they do that, they won't have the funds to finance the other mages' projects. However, he offers to invest his own personal money into Oscar's business. The decision surprises the elder, who protests, saying he cannot do that. The old man reassures her, saying it's fine, and that he will only invest 30,000 bells. He asks Oscar if that amount would be enough. The boy thinks to himself that 30,000 bells isn't even close to being enough. Now inside the potion creation chamber, Oscar decides he will have to go with plan B. He will use that money to manufacture a vaccine sample, and with it, he will manage to wring more money out of the Archbishop. He looks to the side and sees Frank working with him. With a confident smile, Oscar reflects that squeezing money out of desperate people is always the easiest path, and now it's time to start the real work. Oscar starts preparing for his first experiment. He focuses, believing that now is the right time, and carefully adds the various ingredients into the cauldron. Upon finishing, he evaluates the mixture and concludes it didn't turn out bad at all, reflecting that a true master keeps his class forever. Meanwhile, in the background, Frank is trying his hardest to carry heavy sacks full of spices. The boy complains, feeling like his back is going to break, and after dropping all the weight on the floor, he looks like he's about to pass out from exhaustion. Oscar asks if he managed to bring all the missing medicinal herbs. Frank confirms he did and says he can check the material. Seeing the boy's state, Oscar offers him a recovery potion. Frank is surprised and asks if the potion isn't too expensive to be given away for free, but thanks him and drinks it. He comments that the potion is really good, and notes that it's still warm, asking if Oscar just made it. Oscar confirms and praises the excellent condition of the ingredients he brought. Frank boasts, claiming he handpicked the best ones, so much so that the seller even got annoyed with his demands. Oscar jokes that, with such a keen eye, he should become a merchant instead of a mage. The boy honestly replies that he was already thinking of doing exactly that in case the magic tower ends up going bankrupt. In response, Oscar gives him a smack on the head, telling him to shut up and not talk that kind of crap. Frank changes the subject and asks what he needs to do next, since Elder Fedalina sent him there to help. Oscar thinks to himself that, even though Fedalina was very harsh with him personally, she is still trying to help him behind the scenes. He agrees with the boy's presence and instructs Frank to start carrying the ingredients. Oscar reflects that he didn't necessarily need an assistant, but he had read in the records that the current magic tower was full of problem children. Despite having a few screws loose, these kids were especially talented and could contribute a lot if they found the right guidance. He realizes that Frank Sirius is exactly one of these children. Oscar concludes that whoever wrote that report was someone quite perceptive, and begins to get curious about Frank's true potential, deciding that now is the perfect time to test him. Frank interrupts him, commenting on something he noticed while buying the stuff. Those herbs are poisonous. He lists the ingredients: black lilies of the valley, red camellias, ghost mushrooms, and mirva leaves. Oscar explains that the simple fact they are poisonous doesn't mean they can't be used as medicine. He asks if Frank knows what to do with them before use. The boy suggests it would be necessary to put the poisonous herbs in water and boil them for approximately 12 hours. Oscar confirms that this is a valid method, but points out a major problem: the fundamental nutrients also vanish during this boiling process. He then asks Frank if he knows a food called Ian Dynasty dumplings. Frank says yes, that he has tried them before and knows they use a tool called a steamer to prepare the dumplings. Oscar explains that if they use that same tool to detoxify the herbs, they will manage to preserve the absolute majority of the nutrients. With this steam-based method, they can extract up to 98% of the ingredients' positive effects. This leaves Frank in shock. He wonders if Oscar is being serious, because, if it's true, they could monopolize the entire potion market this way. Oscar confidently states that this should be perfectly possible, recalling that this was how the White Tower built its dominance in the past. Frank asks if the detoxification process ends just with the steamer. Oscar denies it, explaining that the steam only softens the ingredients, making detoxification easier, but the real process would start now. As soon as he opens the steamer pot, Oscar casts an air drain magic. With that, the steam rises rapidly, carrying all the poison from the herbs. He explains that, having done that, he only needs to separate the toxins from the steam in isolation. Oscar asks Frank to observe, and begins separating the toxins with precision. Next, he explains that the rest of the steam is now completely free of toxins, so they only need to mix the ingredients in the exact proportion: 23% red camellias and 47% mirva leaves. With the mixture done, he announces that everything is ready, and that is the highly sought-after cure for the Cadena flu. Oscar asks what Frank thought, and comments that the process isn't even that difficult to do. Frank is very surprised, and Oscar tells the boy himself to try replicating what he just saw. Frank thinks to himself that it's easier said than done, as he still can't cast different magics simultaneously. However, his pride prevents him from simply saying he can't. Frank begins to cast and the spell emerges a bit unstable, but Oscar evaluates that, for a start, it's not entirely bad. When the flow jams, Oscar asks if something is wrong. Frank questions if he is mocking him, since he obviously can't use simultaneous magic. The boy argues that to understand that principle of double magic, one would need to be a level 4 or 5 mage, and he is only a level 3 mage. To the boy's surprise, Oscar says he will teach him how to do it right then and there. Frank's eyes widen, and he asks if he is really willing to teach him a secret technique. Oscar instructs him to imagine putting dividers in his own mind. On the left side he processes and uses magic A, and on the right side he focuses and uses magic B. He tells Frank to try applying the concept, stating that the boy has nothing to lose. Frank focuses on the suggested mental dividers and suddenly manages to do something he had never achieved in his life: cast simultaneous magics. Oscar congratulates him with a smile, saying he just learned how to master the technique. Frank questions why, if the concept was so simple, the other towers hid this technique for so long. Oscar dryly replies that it's because mages are greedy. Oscar reflects that the senior mages didn't want to hand over such a valuable technique for free to the juniors, and that ended up becoming a selfish tradition in the magic world. However, he knows that in the bloody battlefields of the past, this tradition of withholding knowledge was nothing more than a fatal setback. For humanity to survive, sharing techniques and having daily strategic discussions were absolutely necessary. He concludes that the current magic tower urgently needs to restore this environment of interactive teaching and knowledge exchange. Frank breaks into a huge smile and is very happy as he finally managed to produce his first potion successfully. Oscar thinks he did a beautiful job and praises the young man's talent, honestly admitting he didn't expect him to pull it off on his very first try. Frank thanks him and says the success is due to the fact that Oscar explained the concept very well. Oscar cuts the celebratory mood short, warning that they still have many ingredients and need to start using them immediately. After a few hours of intense work, Frank collapses exhausted and says he is definitely going to die of fatigue. Oscar finishes counting the vials and announces they produced 514 bottles in total. At that moment, Elder Maxim opens the laboratory door and warns that it seems they are a bit late in the race. Oscar deduces that bureaucracy caused them to lose time for not having an official plan. Maxim laments and says that if another faction manages to sign the contract first, their medicine will become useless, asking Frank to cheer up because sometimes life is just unfair. Oscar, however, does not give up and states that the dispute isn't over yet. He argues that, if he remembers the regulations correctly, the Cadena flu is officially classified as a Class B disaster, and if that's the case, they still have one last trick up their sleeve they can try to use. Maxim is confused and asks if that's true. Oscar, ignoring the doubt, turns to the elder and asks him directly how fast he can make a carriage fly. In a distant city, inside a luxury accommodation in Siren, someone knocks on the door of the Archbishop's room. The assistant announces that the expected guests have finally arrived. The Archbishop tells them to come in. The visitor is Moira Main, a level 5 mage representing the Indigo Tower. He thanks the Archbishop and says that thanks to his care, the trip went smoothly. Right behind the mage enters Neil Brion, the general director of the famous pharmaceutical company New Tech. The Archbishop politely asks both of them to sit down. Neil Brion thanks him for the hospitality. The Archbishop gets straight to the point and asks how the production of the Cadena flu medicine is progressing. The director assures him that the research is going very well. The Archbishop is satisfied and praises them, saying he expected nothing less from a partnership between the Indigo Tower and New Tech. He asks when they can expect the potion batches to finally be ready. The director explains that they only need to conduct a few more clinical safety tests. With good results in these tests, he guarantees they will get permission from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration without major difficulties. The mage Moira Main adds, warning that however, these clinical tests will still take another day or two to be completed. The Archbishop breathes a sigh of relief and asks if, right after these tests are cleared, they will already put the medicines up for sale on the market. Neil Brion smiles and replies that the company's promise is to finish all production and distribution in about half a year. This answer deeply shocks the old Archbishop. In a panic, he asks what they mean by half a year, revealing that his official visit to the infected city of Vince needs to happen in just 4 months. Moira Main says that the problem with the situation is precisely the tight schedule of the El Terra Order. The Archbishop desperately asks what they mean by that, but before they can answer, someone knocks on the door again. The assistant opens a crack and announces that another mage has come to visit him, asking for permission to let him in. The Archbishop looks at Moira Main and Neil Brion and asks why they didn't warn him that there was another scheduled visit in their entourage. The mage and the director look at each other confused and say there is no one else accompanying their group. The three are intrigued and wonder who the mysterious person outside could be. As soon as the door opens completely, the young man enters confidently and gives the classic greeting of the El Terra Order, saying El Cia. He bows slightly and introduces himself as Oscar Crushen, a level 2 mage from the White Tower. With the smile of someone who knows exactly what the old man needs, Oscar announces that he is there to make him a great offer. As soon as the young man enters, the three of them are completely surprised. The Archbishop asks what brings someone from the White Tower there. Oscar replies that he came to sell him the cure for the Cadena flu, which shocks them all over again. The Archbishop comments that he arrived at a good time, since the other two visitors are there for the exact same purpose. Feigning surprise, Oscar asks if he arrived too late. The Archbishop denies it, explaining that the representatives of the Indigo Tower and New Tech aren't fully prepared yet. With a confident smile, Oscar states that this is a relief and declares that the White Tower is ready to negotiate immediately if necessary. Moira Main retorts, accusing Oscar of lying. He argues that the White Tower doesn't have the financial resources or technology to create such a cure, and asks for Oscar's last name. The boy introduces himself as Crushen. The Archbishop recognizes the name as Oscar Crushen and questions if he really has the cure. Oscar replies firmly, asking who would dare lie to the Archbishop of the El Terra Order. He then pulls out a small box and shows it, saying it's a sample of the potion. He asks the Archbishop how many vials would be needed and by when they'd need them if they decided to close the deal right then and there. Moira Main loses his temper and asks how Oscar dares to do that. The Archbishop scolds the mage, telling him to stop shouting and pointing out that he and the new tech director had arrived completely unprepared. Moira argues that they still haven't secured permission from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration. He then glares at Oscar and asks if the White Tower has even obtained FDA approval. Oscar calmly denies it. Moira Main smiles, saying he expected as much. The mage turns to the Archbishop and tries to convince him, stating that the White Tower's situation is no different from theirs. He emphasizes that the Indigo Tower and New Tech have the capacity to mass-produce the treatment in factories all over the continent, needing only to receive legal approval. Furthermore, Moira Main asks the Archbishop to remember that they are talking about the decaying White Tower. Considering the Indigo Tower's long history of excellence, he guarantees that the treatment developed in partnership with the best existing pharmaceutical company will be infinitely superior to their competitors. Oscar ironically agrees with Moira's argument. However, he finds it funny that Moira Main is bragging about a supposedly long history of the Indigo Tower, especially in front of a mage from the White Tower. Moira Main gets furious and demands that Oscar take back what he said immediately. Oscar retorts, asking, according to the continent's history, which magic tower was established first. Moira Main, dismissive, asks if Oscar really wants to argue over a mere 5-year difference. Oscar jumps on the word mere, saying that this 5-year difference is quite interesting. He states that all the masters of the Indigo Tower have always wanted to close that founding gap, but it's a gap that will never be closed, not in 1,000, nor in 10,000 years, because that's just how history works. Oscar also reminds Moira that, 20 years ago, the White Tower held an absolute monopoly over the potion market. Moira argues that this is in the past, and that no one remembers it anymore. At this response, Oscar shows his fury. He unleashes a strong magical pressure, and asks if it's really a past that no one remembers, casting his aura over the two representatives. Oscar concludes by saying that if that's how they see the situation, he will make sure to remind them. Moira Main is stunned, asking himself what that oppressive feeling was, doubting it could come from the aura of a simple level 2 mage. Suddenly, someone enters the room holding a telephone, apologizing for the interruption and announcing an urgent call for the Archbishop. The Archbishop answers and finds out it's the Lord of the city of Vince. On the call, the Lord fervently thanks the Archbishop for his boundless kindness. Confused, the Archbishop asks the Lord the reason for his gratitude. The Lord explains that he is thanking him for sending the cure for the Cadena flu. The revelation leaves the Archbishop stunned. The Lord continues, reporting that the White Tower Elder delivered the shipment, saying it was prepared in secret by the Archbishop himself, and that all thanks should be directed to him. The Lord says that all the patients who took the potion were cured within hours, calling the feat a true miracle and a blessing from the goddess. The Archbishop, trying to hide his surprise, says it's very good to hear that and asks if there were any side effects. The Lord states there have been none so far and reiterates that the result was incredible. Next, the Lord asks when the second batch of the cure will be available. He mentions asking the White Tower Elder, but the Elder replied that the decision was entirely up to the Archbishop. The Archbishop guarantees he will send the second batch as soon as it's ready, and that it shouldn't take long. The Lord thanks him once again before hanging up. After the call, the Archbishop turns to the boy and asks if that was his doing. Oscar casually confirms it, saying that apparently the cure didn't present any problems. Moira Main is outraged by the audacity, pointing out that Oscar's action violates FDA laws and demanding he be punished. Oscar rejects the accusation, saying Moira doesn't understand the laws very well and asks if he knows anything about the laws of war. Moira tells Oscar not to change the subject and questions why he is talking about war in a time of peace. Oscar reflects aloud that the last 20 years must have been incredibly peaceful for the Indigo Tower, to the point that they've forgotten the facts. He recalls that, 2 decades ago, the weapon that claimed the most human lives in the war against the demons was a pandemic. He explains that even when mages managed to produce quick treatments, FDA approval took too long. Because of this, the former emperor added an amendment to Clause Clause 8 of Article 42. The amendment determined that treatments for the wounded in wartime situations would be considered special treatments and therefore exempt from the Empire's FDA laws. Moira tries to defend himself, arguing that the Empire is not at war. Oscar corrects him, explaining that there are 3 specific scenarios in which a situation can legally be considered a war. The first is a direct conflict against another nation or species. The second scenario is the occurrence of an internal revolution. The third, which surprises Moira because he hadn't thought of it, is when a Class B or higher disaster occurs. Based on this, Oscar concludes that the Cadena flu, officially classified as a Class B natural disaster, nullifies the need to follow standard FDA regulations. Neil Brion, the director of New Tech, tries to turn the situation around, telling the Archbishop that if the White Tower managed to bypass the laws, they could too, and promises to send his company's treatment immediately. The Archbishop, however, makes it clear that they don't understand the gravity of the situation. He declares that the race ended the exact moment the White Tower's treatment arrived in the city of Vince. Since the Lord of the City believes the Archbishop is already working in partnership with the White Tower, suddenly switching sides is not an option. Desperate and worried about losing the deal, Neil Brion offers to lower the price of his cure. The Archbishop is offended and asks how he dares try to buy the image and honor of an Archbishop with money. The director tries to explain himself, but the Archbishop cuts him off, says he's heard enough, and orders both of them to leave the room. Moira Main stands up, furious. As he walks past Oscar, he threatens the boy, promising to make him pay for this. Oscar thinks to himself that these losers seem to have a handbook of cliché villain quotes. To make Moira even angrier, Oscar warns him that he has already registered the vaccine's patent at the Imperial Palace. Thus, Moira won't be able to try and steal the formula, and if he wants to sell the treatment the Indigo Tower and New Tech developed, he'll have to pay royalties to the White Tower. Otherwise, Moira will have to throw his entire batch away. The revelation leaves Moira exploding with rage as he storms out of the room. Neil Brion coldly says goodbye to Oscar, and the boy replies neutrally. As the director walks past him toward the door without saying another word, Oscar senses something oddly familiar. He remembers the information given by the thug he interrogated in the past. The person who ordered his assassination exuded a very unique scent, a refreshing aroma of mint. Catching that exact same scent emanating from Neil Brion, the boy is left in a state of shock at the discovery. After the duo leaves, the Archbishop invites Oscar to sit down and states that they can finally talk in peace. The old man suggests they start by discussing the price of the deal and asks the value of the potion. The Archbishop reveals that the Indigo Tower and New Tech were asking for 2 billion bells for the batch. Oscar, seeing the opportunity, says that if the others asked for 2 billion, he will accept just 5 million. The offer seems too good to be true and surprises the Archbishop, who asks if Oscar is being serious. A few hours later, back at the Magic Tower, Elder Fedalina is in disbelief. She holds a check and asks if that document is really worth 10 billion bells. Oscar smiles and confirms that it is. Fedalina immediately hugs him, calling him a gold mine and saying she always knew he could pull it off. Maxim also jumps on the bandwagon, claiming he always believed in Oscar's potential from the very beginning. The Vice Master, although surprised by the amount, tries to understand how Oscar achieved this feat, since not even the Archbishop would be willing to shell out that much money. Oscar calmly explains that there were a few additional fees included in the contract. When the Vice Master asks what kind of fees he is referring to, Oscar reveals with a smile that he charged for running advertisements. The Vice Master asks what he means by advertising fee. Oscar says yes, and that the White Tower's official announcement must be that Archbishop Baldwin had a revelation about the Cadena flu pandemic, and thanks to this they were able to quickly create antidotes. For him who is after the cardinal position, after receiving the Earth Mother's revelation, the Archbishop title must look even better. He must have liked it a lot, because he paid 10 billion bells for the contract, which is much more than they asked for. And in exchange they said they would send vaccines and antidotes within a week. The Vice Master says this is incredible, and that the disciplinary action asked for 3 times the amount, but he brought 400 times more than that. He says he will now end the disciplinary actions, and asks the elders if they have any objections. The elder says none, and he says that if Oscar needs any help, he can count on them. Oscar says they need to gather level 4 mages or higher, as many as possible. The Vice Master says he will gather them, and will leave the volunteer school with him. Oscar asks Elder Fidelina to make an announcement inside the Magic Tower. She asks what she should do, and he says the potion production laboratory is looking for level 4 mages or above. Those who participate will be paid and will receive a portion of meat at every meal. After a few hours, in the potion production laboratory, several candidates wonder if they will really get meat and not just chicken, saying it's truly incredible. At this, Oscar claps his hands for them to pay attention to him, but none of them listen. With a snap of his fingers, he activates the sound restriction, which surprises them all, wondering what that is. Oscar asks for everyone's attention and says the reason they are gathered there is to make the vaccines and antidotes for the Cadena flu, and he needs everyone's help. They ask if this guy is the one who called them, why the genius is bowing to them, and how he will make the medicine, wondering if this might be a scam. This shocks Oscar a lot, who asks Frank if they don't like him. Frank says of course, and he must remember everything he's done so far, as he is annoying, arrogant, and wastes the Magic Tower's resources without doing any research. At this, a blonde mage says hi to Oscar Crushen, and asks if she can ask a few questions. She says the White Tower's production methods were lost, lost, so how will they make the medicine? Oscar says he has already recovered all of them. They ask if he's really serious, and she asks if the antidote's effects were proven, which Oscar confirms. Knowing the contract with the El Terra order was also made, she says this must be worth a fortune. And if the production method leaked, meat portions would be a joke, asking why he is trusting them enough to share this information. Oscar says he will be honest, and tells them he doesn't know why they are still at the White Tower. That girl, very pissed, asks if this is the attitude of someone who asked them for a favor, saying that coming here was a waste of time. She doesn't know what the genius's intention is in saying something like this, but he isn't the only person there who should hear this. Oscar says he knows the sacrifices they made for the White Tower. She asks what he means, and Oscar calls her Lena White, a 25-year-old level 5 mage. Because of her talent and judgment, 7 companies including the Red Tower tried to recruit her, but she rejected all of them, and Harak Dryan, a 26-year-old level 5 mage, the royal palace offered the position of royal mage in recognition of his martial and mystical skills, but he refused. And Deckard Rhine, a 26-year-old level 5 mage, the Imperial Academy offered him a professor position 4 times, but he refused them all, and also Sophia Rose, a 23-year-old level 4 mage, because of her creative alchemical skills. The Golden Tower tried to recruit her, but she refused too. And besides the ones he mentioned, others received similar proposals, and if such an offer were made to him, he doesn't know if he could resist. But none of them abandoned this place. Lena asks if the other elders know this information. Oscar says yes, but they had no choice but to pretend they didn't know, as they didn't want to harm all of them. The White Tower is facing the worst winter they've ever faced, and in this situation, even if they could have gone to a cozier place, they chose to stay in this cold. And if he can't trust people like this, who else would he trust? And even if they don't want to, there's nothing he can do. Meanwhile, Frank in the back says these are crocodile tears, but Oscar keeps saying that they, low-level mages, will have to work themselves to death anyway. Frank asks if this is a subtle dig. Lena just watches, goes towards him and asks if they just need to put on the safety goggles. And one by one they go up to him accepting the job. Frank comments who would have thought Oscar would convince them with just words. They ask if they are dreaming, and Oscar says that if it's a dream, it's not a bad one. And he tells everyone he would like to let them know the meat is not pork. They get very sad thinking it's chicken then, but he says it's steak. They get very happy and start celebrating because they are finally going to eat steak for lunch. It was said that the vaccines and antidotes were successfully produced, reaching 140% of the original goal. After a week, Oscar went to the greenhouse and only saw a few petals and a little leaf in the middle. He realizes this is old Walter, who must have returned, and is certain the tower's vice master dragged him back there. He starts reading the newspapers, and it says there that the city of Vince announces the end of the pandemic 2 days after the Cadena flu antidotes distribution. It was a sign showing the beginning of the White Tower's resurrection, and a little pebble thrown into the potion market that is creating huge waves. Oscar Krushen was nominated for this year's Peace Prize, in the Magic Tower's words, and he thinks things are going according to his plan. Frank goes up to him, saying it's incredible, and that the vaccine orders are pouring in. He asks if he saw the list. The Northern Territories, the El Terra Order, and even the Imperial family. He says they will certainly make millions of bells easily. Oscar says of course, if you care about life, then you need a vaccine. Frank asks if this won't decrease at some point. Oscar says he is smarter than he looks and knows this demand won't last forever. Frank says he looks like an idiot, and asks who would buy vaccines after the vaccinations were over, considering the next epidemic might happen decades from now. Oscar says he doesn't need to worry about money, because he made a potion that will always be in demand. Frank understands he didn't recover just one, that he really had a plan, and asks if by any chance it's the Star Tears. Oscar says no, the potions they will sell will be inferior and intermediate, as it's not yet time for a potion like that. Thinking that the Star Tears, the White Tower's most famous recovery potion, is a miracle potion said to be able to bring the dead back to life, it will cause incredible effects when released. But he thinks producing it now will only make the bastards try to steal the production method. He is confident that this time he managed to use the Archbishop as a shield, but they need to increase the White Tower's strength first. Frank says great, and that he should gather the materials for these potions now. Frank grumbles that he shouldn't have said anything. Oscar says he wants him to look for Latin's leaves, Pisum stems, and other things. Frank, surprised, says just those two will be hard to find. Oscar asks what he is talking about, since both are Siren specialties. The kid asks what he means, since that was a long time ago, and it's been years since the fields where they grew are gone. This shocks Oscar a lot, asking what he means. Thus the two went towards that field, with Frank asking if he is crazy, and if he really had to come personally just because he didn't believe him. Even the carriage guy said he couldn't go any further from there, and they had to go on foot for 10 miles. Frank asked what he meant by 10 miles, since this measurement disappeared 18 years ago. Oscar asked what he meant, and if they really don't use miles anymore. Frank clarifies that the distance measurement units were unified into meters since the war. Oscar keeps thinking they are really getting rid of everything from the past, and since miles are gone, all those calculations that were part of the fun are also gone. He gets very sad about this. At this, Frank tells him he saw a cabin right there. They go to the cabin and Frank asks if there's anyone inside. A guy opens the door and asks if he really walked all the way there. Frank says yes, and says the carriage could only go up to the entrance. Right after, they see some cars right behind them. The cars drive through the crop without caring worrying about anything. A guy with glasses stops and asks the owner if he feels like selling his lands now. And so, the old man steps out of his house. A very well-dressed man asks if it isn't past time for him to stop being so stubborn. The old man firmly replies that there's no way. He states he wouldn't sell the place even if he were offered an entire castle in exchange. The well-dressed man, mockingly calling him owner, says that playing hard to get will only work for a few more days. This man is the entrepreneur Devor Powell. Powell asks if he continues living in that isolated manner, who will care or recognize him when he dies. The old man retorts that it is none of the businessman's business. He is the arborist Ivan. Devor insists he is saying this for Ivan's own good, and asks him to sell the land soon, so he can enjoy the rest of his life very comfortably. The businessman warns that as soon as industries and factories start appearing around them, the value of that land will plummet to rock bottom. Ivan laughs, finding the threat amusing. He counters that as long as he is there will be no legal permission to build any factory in the vicinity. The old man stares at him firmly. Devor, realizing he won't get anywhere, turns his back and announces he is leaving. Walking away harshly, he ends up stepping on and trampling some plants and herbs on the way. With disdain, he throws some crumpled bills on the ground and says that amount should be fair to compensate for the plants. He then leaves the place, destroying a bit more of the crop along the way. Inside his car, Devor asks his subordinate if the clothes of the guys near Ivan weren't White Tower uniforms. The henchman confirms and comments he heard the tower is going to have a lot of money recently from vaccine production. Devor finds this strange and asks what vaccine he is talking about. The subordinate hands him the daily newspaper and asks him to read it. After reading the article, Devor gets angry, cursing the mages as bastards and hitting his henchman on the head with the newspaper. He furiously asks why he's only hearing about this now. Devor reasons that if old man Ivan has secured the official support of the White Tower, he will definitely keep refusing purchase offers for many years. To the businessman, this absolutely cannot happen, as it's getting increasingly difficult for him to pay the exorbitant interest rates on his loans. Devor, determined to resolve the situation another way, confronts his subordinate, reminding him that he mentioned knowing some mercenaries, and orders him to hire them immediately. The henchman asks what kind of service he should commission. Devor loses his patience, hits him on the head with the newspaper again, and says the answer is obvious. They must make the old arborist disappear first. With Ivan dead, it will be ownerless land and will go to auction, and then they can buy it for a ridiculously low price. Devor acknowledges the action will be a bit suspicious, but guarantees there will be no problems, as he has powerful people backing him. The subordinate hesitates and asks how they will deal with the Magic Tower mages on the property. Devor coldly replies that if they try to intervene, just kill them too. The henchman points out it will be very difficult to deal with the consequences if the 4 main magic towers get involved in the assassination of their faction members and old Ivan. Devor, ignoring the risks, questions what is the worst that could happen. He mocks the concern, saying the title 4 main magic towers is already outdated and that the White Tower already has 1 foot in the grave and is powerless to do anything about it. At night, Frank comments to Oscar that he thinks the old arborist is a good man. He points out that Ivan let them sleep there because it was already late and even offered them food. Oscar agrees, recalling the moment in the afternoon when the old man offered them shelter. At the time, Ivan said that since it was too late to travel, they could sleep at his house. Frank had asked if that wouldn't cause problems, but Ivan answered with conviction that he was always loyal to the White Tower. Oscar, still trying to understand the depth of this loyalty, silently wondered what Ivan meant by that. Driven by curiosity, Frank asks Ivan who the arrogant man from earlier was. Ivan explains his name is Devor Powell, a ruthless man who abuses, threatens, and even kills to achieve his financial goals. Ivan says Devor started forcibly buying all the land in that area 3 years ago, with the exception of his. Since then, several arborists suddenly left Surin or simply disappeared without a trace and never returned. Frank, shocked by the information, asks how a man can go so far and commit so many crimes with impunity. Ivan reveals that Devor's goal is to turn that place into the largest and most polluting industrial area on the entire continent. Oscar then asks how Ivan has withstood the pressure for so long. The old man smiles slightly and says that bastard can't mess with him directly, because in fact it's the businessman himself who is at a severe legal disadvantage. Ivan reveals he is officially recognized as a human cultural asset for the cultivation of rare medicinal herbs. Frank immediately understands the importance of the title and deduces that, because of it, the old man receives direct protection from the imperial family. Ivan confirms the deduction, saying that was the only reason he managed to survive the businessman's greed. However, Oscar argues practically, saying Ivan could become incredibly rich if he simply sold the land. The boy asks why he never did it. Ivan's answer is simple and obvious to him. He deeply loves that land. That place has been his home since the day he was born, and it will continue to be his home until his dying breath. Oscar reflects on the words and concludes aloud that Ivan really is a good man. Frank, admiring the night landscape and the clear sky far from Siren's pollution, comments that the stars there also also seem much brighter, confessing he feels a certain envy of the old man. Oscar, surprised, asks what he is envious of. Frank tries to hide it but ends up confessing his own desires. He says he always wondered what it would feel like to live an incredible and fulfilled life, but quickly belittles himself, saying a born genius like Oscar would never understand the frustration and mediocrity he feels. Oscar interrupts him, saying with a tone of sincerity that Frank, by himself, is already someone quite impressive. Frank, used to being underestimated, thinks it's just pity, and ironically thanks him for the empty words of encouragement. To his surprise, Oscar counters that they aren't empty words, and asserts he isn't the type of person who hands out praise for no good reason. In his thoughts, Oscar confesses that, honestly, he can't understand why the young Oscar Crushen wrote in his diary that this boy was problematic, since Frank's talent was evident to him. Changing the subject, Oscar comments that, in the past it was possible to see the stars clearly, even right in the middle of Siren. He thinks to himself that now, with the magical streetlights artificially illuminating everything, they can no longer contemplate them. He concludes that, despite the difficulties of the past, the inconvenient darkness of that era actually had its romantic side. Frank asks how long ago that happened, curious about the city's old stories. Frank continues and questions if they really have the capacity to profitably revive Siren's old herb industries. Oscar shows confidence, saying he doesn't think the mission is impossible, but they will need to enter into more detailed negotiations with the Siren City Council the next day. Suddenly, to Frank's surprise, Oscar's expression changes drastically. He senses something strange in the air. Frank asks what happened. Oscar lowers his voice and warns that there are people hiding in the darkness, pointing out that there are 4 in total. Frank says he can't sense anything. The boy thinks to himself that despite Frank's current level granting him good senses to detect mana fluctuations, the assassins outside are professionals at hiding their presence. Oscar is absolutely certain they didn't come there with good intentions. He tells Frank to get up and prepare to receive their nighttime visitors. Outside, the assassins run silently toward the cabin. One of them, showing confusion, asks the group what exactly has changed since the last time they tried to attack the target. He remembers the same contractor refused to pay for the old man's death before. The assassin calls the businessman OVERPOWER a coward, recalling that at the time he made the excuse that it would be too difficult to deal with the severe repercussions of killing a protected imperial citizen. The oldest in the group cuts off the complaint, saying that doesn't matter and who cares about the contractor's reasons. The logic is simple. If someone pays them, they do what must be done and ask no questions. A man looking like the leader, running right behind them, demands silence. He orders them to stop talking immediately and demands focus, warning them not to lower their guard for a single second. This is the dreaded Jack the Gunslinger's gang. The youngest of the group warns that intelligence indicated the presence of a mage protecting the target in the cabin. The older assassin dismisses the threat, saying they are from the White Tower, which is a huge relief. He states it would be very complicated to deal with if the protectors were mages from other stronger towers. The young rookie in front of him, however, smiles expectantly, hoping the mages are still there, as he really wants to test his skills by facing one in real combat. Sneaking up to the entrance, the youth asks his leader if he should be the first to breach the house. Observing the silence of the environment, he thinks the place is too quiet and assumes the old man must already be in a deep sleep. As soon as he slowly opens the door, he heads straight toward the old man's bed, knife in hand, ready to deliver the fatal strike. He thinks to himself that this job is too boring, as assassinating someone in their sleep would be too easy. However, the moment he advances, he notices something strange. When he focuses his vision on the target, he realizes he stepped into a trap and is completely screwed. He tries to turn around quickly to escape the danger or alert the others, but Oscar is already positioned and coldly declares that it's too late. The boy makes a subtle movement, like flicking the air, and activates the wind bullet magic. The magical attack flawlessly and without warning pierces the assassin's head. Seeing the effectiveness of the lethal strike, Oscar reflects that the spell is extremely useful in quick combat. He notes that the wind bullet was exactly one of the basic magic reinterpretation spells that young Oscar Crushen developed in his theoretical notes. It is an innovative magic, as it works as a piercing attack spell, utilizing the same ballistic principle of a firearm through the traditional and versatile wind manipulation magic of the White Tower. Oscar thinks to himself that the attack is much more lethal than he had initially imagined, and coldly calculates that, apparently, there are only 3 enemies left alive now. Oscar opens the main door and steps out, facing the 2 remaining assassins who were waiting for their partner's return. One of them, with mop-like hair, notices the boy's calmness and rudely asks what he did to their companion, young Max. Oscar replies with a sarcastic smile that he is sleeping, but cruelly adds that he thinks Max will be sleeping for a very long time, or perhaps even forever. The old assassin, revolted by the audacity, calls him a pathetic bastard. He turns to the group leader and tries to justify his hatred, reminding him that he had warned the rookie to never lower his guard under any circumstances. The leader, ignoring Oscar's provocations, demands that he just hand over the exact location of the arborist Ivan, promising that in exchange for the information, the gang wouldn't hold a grudge over Max's death and would let him live. Oscar observes the leader's behavior and thinks they aren't falling for his childish provocations. They are just focusing on the objective and avoiding unnecessary fights, confirming that they are indeed highly trained and cold professional assassins. In response, Oscar adopts a mocking posture and says they have full permission to hold as much of a grudge as they want, because he isn't giving up the target no matter what. The leader loses his patience with the mocking tone and warns warns that if he wants to see blood so badly, he'll get what he wishes for. Without hesitation, he orders the older partner to attack Oscar, telling him to kill him right there. The assassin rushes quickly at the boy with bloodlust. Oscar acts with impressive speed and activates his magical barrier in an instant, avoiding the first fatal blow. After witnessing Oscar defend himself and dodge the lethal attack, the old assassin gives a little chuckle and admits that for a rookie, he is truly impressive on the battlefield. The assassin claims that Oscar doesn't know his weapon is unique. Quickly, his spear splits and turns into 2 blades. The old man says it is truly a pity, but the fight ends now. Oscar, with his finger raised, says that this is more boring than he imagined. With another flick, he shoots 2 wind bullets directly at the old man's weapons. The assassin thinks that's impossible, and despite being caught off guard, Oscar is not shocked. Instead, the boy shoots in a sophisticated manner and quickly destroys the enemy's weapons. Oscar states that such a unique weapon is no big deal and isn't even that new. To his surprise, he feels a chill in his body and quickly takes a few steps back. The old man mocks him, saying that retreating right after winning shows the boy must be playing with him. However, to the assassin's own surprise, there is a firearm pointed right behind his head. In an instant, the old man's forehead is pierced. The bullet goes through his head and heads straight toward Oscar. The boy manages to protect himself using his shield, but the projectile grazes him, missing by a hair. The gang leader, positioned behind, sighs and says it's really a shame, as he would have killed Oscar if the boy had lowered his guard just a little more. Oscar asks if the dead old man wasn't his colleague. The leader coldly replies that, to be more precise, he was just a subordinate, someone easy to replace. Oscar thinks to himself that criminal minds are terrible and asks what kind of little toy that was shooting at him. The leader replies that the weapon's creator would be sad to hear Oscar call it a little toy, and warns him that he just needs to know the equipment cost a fortune. Oscar analyzes the weapon and says, acceleration, enhancement, and penetration. He points out that these are the 3 spells applied to it and asks if he got it right. This greatly surprises the shooter, who questions how the boy knew that. Oscar explains that he deduced the magic by the simple fact that he couldn't block the shot completely. The gang leader smiles and says the boy is arrogant, but acknowledges he has a talent for magic. The leader proposes that Oscar work for him, promising that the boy would be very well paid. Oscar refuses the offer on the spot. The man asks the reason for the refusal. The boy replies that his neck would tickle all the time, fearing being betrayed just like the old man was. The leader bursts out laughing and agrees, admitting that it is true. The man decides they don't need to talk anymore, and starts shooting frantically at Oscar. The boy crouches to protect himself, and mentally questions what deplorable state the former master of the magic tower has reached to be going through that pathetic situation. Oscar evaluates the combat and realizes that, since his wind bullets are slower than the magical shots, a direct confrontation is disadvantageous. Furthermore, he has only half his mana left and knows he can't dodge and run forever. The enemy's only opening is the time needed to reload the weapon's cylinder. Oscar notices the pattern. After shooting twice, the shooter pauses to reload, and after exactly 1.24 seconds, he attacks again. The shooter taunts, asking where the little mouse ran off to. Oscar thinks fast and knows the enemy only has 1 bullet left before the next reload. If he manages to act within the exact window of 1.24 seconds, he can end the fight. With this in mind, he uses the acceleration magic and runs quickly towards the shooter's back. The enemy notices the movement, praises the boy's speed, and warns that he found him. Oscar charges forward, protected by his shield. The shooter points the weapon, aims with precision, and fires, declaring that it is the end for the mage. The bullet goes straight against Oscar's shield, and the psychopath smiles, thinking the fight is over. But, to his complete surprise, Oscar manages to deflect the projectile. Confident, the boy continues to advance on the leader. The assassin is in shock and wonders how that was possible, since dodging that shot using only the acceleration effect should be humanly impossible. Soon he concludes that the answer lay in how Oscar used the shield. In the blink of an eye, Oscar appears right in front of the enemy, already preparing his wind bullet. The shooter, desperate, asks how a lower-level mage could overcome his state-of-art weapon. Oscar launches the lethal magic and counters the question with mockery, asking if the enemy would even understand the theory if he stopped to explain it. After the shooter falls lifeless, Oscar sighs and comments that, anyway, that guy was using an extremely annoying weapon. The boy inspects the fallen revolver and sees the word Trinity engraved on it, confirming that the 3 embedded spells were acceleration, enhancement, and penetration. He acknowledges that the weapon is incredible, as the battle was truly difficult. Oscar reflects on his own strategy. By using the concepts of friction reduction and internal durability enhancement on the windshield, the outer layer of the barrier became flexible, while the inside remained rigid. It was this exact combination that allowed the enemy bullet to slide and be deflected, instead of piercing the defense. Oscar decides that as soon as he returns to the White Tower, he will initiate new research to develop tactics focused on countering modern weapons. But of course, before that, he needs to save Frank and Ivan. He does the mental math and remembers there were 4 assassins from the start. Since he already eliminated 3, only one remains, the one who went after Frank. In the other part of the property, the last assassin is facing Frank and Ivan. Frank acts fast and orders the old arborist to leave immediately. Ivan hesitates and asks what will happen to him. The kid tries to reassure him, claiming he will be fine because he is very strong, and argues he won't be able to fight properly if he has to protect Ivan at the same time. He promises to meet the old man later, and thus Ivan flees far far from there. The assassin mocks Frank, telling him to be careful, as those heroic little lies seem like quicksand. He taunts the boy, asking if he liked that farewell. Frank remains unfazed, and questions why the assassin chose to go after him instead of chasing Ivan, since the old man was the target. The man finds it funny, and asks who Frank thinks he is. He mocks the tactic, saying the boy sent the old man away thinking the assassin would go after Ivan, all to try and survive. Frank just stares at him in silence. The assassin admits that old Ivan is indeed the objective of the mission. However, he reveals he always had the curiosity to find out what is so special about the mages of the 4 main magic towers that makes people so afraid of them. Excited by the opportunity, he says he now wants to see who kills the other first and charges forward at Frank. The boy activates the wind cutter magic. The assassin easily blocks the attack and mocks, saying that is too easy. The man states that the fight is getting fun and lands a sword strike right on Frank's chest. He starts laughing loudly, declaring that the combat is already over and taunting, asking if that was really all the famous magic tower could do. Suddenly, the assassin goes into shock upon hearing a strange noise and feeling a bizarre resistance on his blade. When he realizes it, Frank has grabbed the sword with his bare hands and, in a lethal counterattack, slices the enemy's neck. The assassin falls dead on the ground, and Frank looks at the body, asking for forgiveness. He calmly explains that he has a somewhat special physical constitution. In the exact place where the sword should have pierced and hit something vital, there is nothing, just a vacuum. And after killing the assassin, he runs to the body and thinks he made a mess. But right beside him, Oscar appears. He just watches, and thinks that Frank is a special mage, and with the wind god on top of that. And who would have thought Frank would have magic to make his own body like the wind? Since physical attacks don't work on him, it's a very strong ability that cannot be faced without magic or a key sword. Even he, the master of the magic tower, only saw this in old books. And these records were only about the 7th master of the magic tower, a special mage who was said to have innate magic. And he never imagined that Frank would have received his wind god. Thus he appears to Frank, which leaves the boy very scared, saying that he scared him a lot. The boy says he was worried, but he says that he did a good job, but asks where he left Ivan to be boasting like that. Frank realizes he doesn't know where Ivan is and goes screaming looking for him. Meanwhile, Oscar thinks that if he trains him well, his abilities could surpass dozens of superior mages. He points to the side and says he feels his energy coming from there. At dawn, Ivan thanks Frank. He says that although one of the swordsmen fled, if it weren't for him it would have been terrible. Frank asks what he means, and Oscar explains that the old man is saying they would have problems without his help, which leaves Frank even more embarrassed. Frank asks if now everything is finally over, but Ivan says not exactly. He isn't the kind of bastard who would give up just because of this, and if the assassination doesn't work, he will find another way. Frank asks why he is obsessed with this land. Ivan says this is the best land in Surin, and also the largest, so the location is perfect, and the fertility of Surin's lands has declined a lot in the last 8 years. This was the result of the magic item factories in the western region dumping sewage and pollutants into the Balf River every single day. And if he starts building factories closer to there, a day might come where resisting is useless. He continues saying that the fertility of Surin's other lands can never be recovered, so he wouldn't have the energy to cultivate them there. But to Ivan's surprise, Oscar says he has a question. He says that this loyalty to the magic tower he mentioned yesterday, he wants to know if it's related to the promise with Renald Ias, the 4th master of the magic tower. And after he says that, Ivan says he said something quite touching. Oscar says he read it in an old book, but thinks he actually saw it in a book that is only given to the tower masters. Ivan says that, in the end, all the arborists on the continent began to gather in Surin, and it was the first time those nomads had a home. Frank says then it's the White Tower. Ivan interrupts him and says yes, the White Tower gifted his ancestors with pride and a home. And how could he abandon the White Tower like that? Oscar stares at him very happy, bows and thanks him for all the hard work. He says the White Tower will now be by his side once again, which surprises Ivan a lot, asking in what way. Frank says that if the Imperial family found out a human resource was attacked, they would take care of it immediately. Ivan says he doesn't know if the Imperial family would have time for that, and he can't leave there. And the Imperial family is thorough with their work, and because of that, they are also slow. If Devor launches a mass attack during that time, the Imperial family won't be able to respond. But Oscar asks him not to worry, because the Imperial family will move at the speed of light. Ivan asks what he means and what he is talking about. Oscar just says that today is the day he signs the contract for the Kadena flu treatment with the Imperial family. In Devor's office, he tells his employee to start packing everything, because he is leaving. They really ruined everything to the point of driving him into bankruptcy. And after they flee, he says he will destroy the old man. But, by surprise, several guards enter his office ordering him not to move. Their leader says he is Senior Superintendent Walker, from the Imperial Ministry of the National Security Internal Affairs Agency. Devor asks why the Senior Superintendent is there in his house. The leader says so he is Devor, and he is under arrest for attempted murder, blackmail, illegal property possession, and damages to a cultural human resource, which surprises Devor a lot, saying he got the wrong guy and that he is a legitimate businessman. But the superintendent says they will judge that later, and he must shut his mouth now and walk with them. Devor thinks this sucks and he can't deal with this alone. He can only find a way to escape and contact that person. This villain asks if he could at least smoke his last cigar. The superintendent stares at him and orders to handcuff him now and take him away as fast fast as possible. When he starts screaming that they are making a mistake and if they know who his backer is. The superintendent says he doesn't know, but says his backer is the emperor himself, and asks if perhaps Devor's backer is more important than his majesty, which shocks Devor a lot, thinking it's impossible to tell who this guy is for him to have reacted right on the first day, since he thinks it's the first time. The superintendent says this order came from above. The assistant asks what he means from above. His boss says the emperor loves the White Tower very much. The assistant asks what this means, and the superintendent says it's an adult matter, and the kid doesn't know why he likes them so much. The assistant says it's true that in the past they made heroic achievements, but it's been 20 years, and even if you release an injured bird in a high place, the only change will be the speed of the fall. Objectively speaking, the White Tower doesn't have the capacity or right to receive this treatment right now. Walker asks Dolan how old he is. Dolan says he will be 23 this year. Walker says then he was 3 years old 20 years ago, and he himself was 12 at the time. When humanity conquered true freedom after winning the war against the demons, he wonders what kind of existence the White Tower was back then, and the higher-ups still remember them from that time and can't let go of their expectations. Walker says that now they will go. The assistant asks what he means, thinking they were done for today. But the superintendent says fortunately not. The assistant asks the destination, and the boss tells the others to take care of the rest and go home. They will go west now and order the factories near the Balf River to stop expelling their pollutants illegally, while thinking that this was something he added personally, even without knowing anything about the White Tower and this Oscar Crushen and Frank Sirius. This is his way of giving back for taking down Jack the Gunslinger's gang. The assistant in the back asks if they can't buy food first, and the boss says no, they will eat later. Oscar says Frank did a good job. Frank asks what he is going to do now, and if he wants a drink. Oscar says they are going to report to the tower's vice master, and if he wants to come along. But Frank says no, and that he will leave now. At this, Vice Master Hamill appears in the back calling for Frank and Oscar. Frank, nervous, says he has to go now, so they'll see each other later. Hamill approaches and says he thought he saw Frank, and maybe he was mistaken. Oscar says yes, but he just left because he had an urgent matter. Hamill says he supposes it really was urgent, but anyway, he really solved another one of the big problems, and will hear the report in his room. Oscar says yes, he's already on his way. In the elevator, Oscar just keeps staring at the old man, wondering if something is wrong. The old man asks if Frank said anything. Oscar says no, and asks what it is, and if something is wrong with him. Hamill says he isn't sure, and they said they finished talking to him, and so he doesn't know the details, which left Oscar quite surprised. Someone knocks on the door of Frank's room. Frank tells them to come in, and whoever enters addresses the boy, questioning him and calling him Grancy, the youngest son of the Empire's largest trading company. This surprises Frank, who asks if Oscar really heard everything. Oscar asks if Frank is really going to leave the White Tower. Frank apologizes for not telling him sooner, and explains that it's hard to talk when the mood is grim. He needs to return to his position, help at the company, and also get married. Oscar finds the marriage part strange and asks since when he had a girlfriend. Frank says that apparently she is a good person and comes from a good family, which will help a lot with business. Oscar asks if he is okay with this, and Frank replies that if she is pretty, nice, and from a good family, there is no reason not to be fine with the situation. Oscar clarifies that he isn't talking about the marriage, but rather the decision to give up on magic. Frank is shocked and questions what else he could do, stating that his talent only goes so far. He confesses that honestly, he thought he was special, and believed that by going to the weakest of the magic towers, he could at least become an important person. But after getting there, he realized that wasn't what happened. Frank admits he can barely accomplish anything, and that he can't face reality, understanding his family's perspective of wanting him to return to the company. Oscar interrupts him, speaking very seriously. Frank, nervous, asks why he is talking like that, and if Oscar knows the reason he called the White Tower weak. To Frank's surprise, Oscar simply says that he is a talented person. Frank gets embarrassed and thanks him, saying that hearing this from a genius before leaving is something really nice. But Oscar states he is being serious, and asks if Frank wants to try to truly become someone more important. At that moment, someone enters the room calling for Frank. The boy gets scared upon realizing it is his older brother. The brother looks at Oscar and deduces that he is a colleague of Frank's. Next, he warns Frank that he has only 5 minutes to come down as quickly as possible, and that he will be waiting outside. After the brother leaves the room, Frank says that the time has come to say his final goodbye. Oscar stops him and asks Frank's brother how much he wants to let the boy stay there at the tower. The brother returns, irritated, and asks who he thinks he is to ask something like that. The boy introduces himself as Oscar Crushen, a friend of Frank's. The brother recognizes the name and concludes that he is the mage who made the medicine. He introduces himself as Grank Sirius, the older brother of this fool, the firstborn of the Sirius family, and the vice leader of the trading company. Oscar proposes a deal to Grank Sirius. Frank tells Oscar to stop it, but the brother comments that Oscar is truly reckless. Grank says he heard the boy was a genius, and suggests that maybe this is why a child dares to ask for a deal with the powerful Sirius family. Oscar, excited, guarantees that it won't be a bad deal for either side, and promises he will turn Frank into one of the best mages of the White Tower in just 2 years. The promise greatly surprises Frank. Oscar explains that, in the long long run, this will be of great benefit to the family. Grant ponders, saying that forging a great mage of one of the 4 main magic towers in just 2 years is something to think about, but asks what the penalty would be if Oscar failed. Oscar simply replies that he will hand over all the profits from the sales of the Cadena flu vaccine for the next 50 years to the Sirius Trading Company. Grant questions whether Oscar really has the authority to make such a bet. Oscar guarantees he will have the tower's vice master as his official witness in the agreement. Grant notes that Oscar is going very far for his younger brother and asks if Frank is really worth all that or if it's just out of blind friendship. Oscar asserts that it's obviously because Frank is worth it, which leaves the boy very surprised and moved. Oscar explains his vision, saying he is planning to make the White Tower recover its reputation in up to 5 years, at most. He states that the vaccine and the medicines are simply the spark to warn everyone about the beginning of this resurgence of power, and for that he urgently needs Frank Sirius. Frank is exactly what he needs in the White Tower he has in mind. Grant says Oscar is quite young, but as a merchant he has no reason not to take advantage of his opponent's innocence in a negotiation. He says that, instead of accepting immediately, he will impose a condition. Oscar replies that he thinks his offer is already quite good. Grant agrees, but reminds him he forgot one thing. Human merchants value trust above all else, and don't make deals with just anyone, so Oscar needs to prove his practical worth. Grant reveals he has a level 5 knight serving him as a personal guard. He challenges Oscar to face the guard at noon the next day to prove his combat skills, and only then will he sign the deal. Oscar understands and says Grant wants him to face the knight even knowing he is only a level 2 mage. Grant, trying to sound fair, says he will set the condition that the guard won't use the key sword during the fight. Oscar thinks to himself that Grant is basically telling him to give up on Frank, and deduces that the family they want to marry Frank into must not be just any family. Grant simply leaves the room, says goodbye, and warns that he expects to see him at noon. Otherwise he'll assume Oscar gave up. After the brother leaves, Oscar thinks he would really have serious trouble facing a level 5 enemy. Frank, very surprised and worried, asks what he is going to do, and tells Oscar to cancel the bet immediately, claiming he can try to convince his brother himself. Frank warns that Grant only proposed this because he is annoyed and wants to destroy Oscar. To Frank's surprise, Oscar says he thinks winning is possible. Frank questions how a level 2 could beat a level 5 knight. Oscar replies that maybe a level 4 mage could win. Frank doesn't understand and asks if Oscar is really saying he'll reach level 4 in just 1 day of training. Oscar laughs and says that would be impossible even for him, but reveals that instead it is possible to transform a mage who is stuck at the peak of level 3 into a level 4 mage. This surprises Frank a lot. Oscar explains that Grant didn't say he had to win the fight personally. He only said Oscar needed to prove his skills. Therefore he can simply show Grant that he is capable of making Frank stronger. The plan is to transform him into a level 4 mage so that Frank can fight for him. In the training room, Frank says he doesn't know what they could do in just 1 day to achieve what he couldn't in the last few years of training. Oscar tells him to trust him and instructs Frank to stand still, relax completely, close his eyes, and circulate his mana throughout his entire body. Oscar watches him closely and says the flow is good. Next he points to various parts of Frank's body and explains that those are the areas where mana loss occurs during circulation. He states that by fixing those areas, Frank's magic will become complete. Frank, amazed, asks if all geniuses can see that. Oscar denies it and says only he can. Frank asks if by fixing these flaws, he will finally be able to level up. Oscar says this has no direct relation to level, and that 99% of mages wouldn't even care about this technical detail. Frank doesn't understand and asks why. Oscar explains that only 0.1%, the so-called archmages, care about the perfection of circulation, and that from now on Frank will practice this every morning. Oscar begins explaining various theoretical and complex magical concepts, which leaves Frank completely lost. After hearing it all, Frank pretends he understood and asks if that's what he should do in the fight. Oscar denies it and demands that Frank show him right now the magic he instinctively used in the fight at the herb field. Frank is shocked and asks if Oscar really saw that. Oscar confirms. Frank apologizes but confesses he cannot show the magic, saying he thought Oscar trusted him. Oscar asserts that it's not a matter of a lack of trust. Frank, defeated, admits he is afraid to use it again. Oscar is surprised and asks the reason for the fear. Frank explains that in the past he almost died using that magic, revealing that his anxiety only increased as he grew up and tried to master it. He shares that he realized how incredibly strong it would be if he could transform his entire body into the wind. Driven by ambition, he had a reckless idea that day. At first he thought he had succeeded, but the end result was something he never imagined. The magic spiraled out of control, and he couldn't stop the transformation, resulting in a total failure. After transforming half of his body into the wind, his mana became uncontrollable, and he started screaming for help. He confesses he would have died that day if the former Tower Master hadn't intervened and stopped the process. More accurately, he would have ceased to physically exist. At that time, there was nothing he could do to reverse the situation on his own. He describes the horrifying sensation of his soul being torn into hundreds of thousands of pieces during the process, which was deeply shocking and traumatic. Because of this, he swore never to forget the pain and decided never to try something like that again. Oscar argues that he recently used it on the hill to defend himself. Frank justifies that the magic only activates automatically as an instinctive reflex in dangerous near-death situations, and laments, asking if that isn't pathetic. Oscar Oscar disagrees and categorically states that he shouldn't think he is pathetic, as several mages face similar problems and deal with trauma. Oscar explains that the solution to the trauma is simple. Frank's biggest problem was his limited ability to control his own mana under pressure, so he just needs to improve specifically in that area. Frank asks if mana control doesn't rely purely on innate talent, and questions how he could improve that now. Oscar admits that normally this would be the case, but he knows an alternative way to forcibly increase that ability. As Oscar moves around the room, Frank asks what he is doing. Oscar replies that he is drawing a summoning circle on the floor. Frank gets scared and asks what he is going to summon, questioning if he is going to make a dark contract with a demon or something of the sort. Oscar denies it, noting that demons would never make contracts with him, even if he called them. Frank, still fearful, asks what will be summoned then. Oscar, with a confident smile, replies that he is going to summon a wind spirit to put directly into the boy's body. In this way, Frank introduces himself, saying he is Frank Sirius, the human seeking a spirit's help. He asks for a companion who agrees to make a pact with those present there. However, after the attempt, Frank looks at Oscar and warns him it didn't work. Oscar comments that Frank's affinity with spirits is shit. Frank defends himself, saying he even felt a little breeze just now. Oscar immediately counters, clarifying that it was just him sighing in disappointment, not a spirit. Frank gets very embarrassed and grumbles that this sucks. Oscar tries to ease the situation, telling him not to be so disappointed, because in the end, only a very small number of humans are born with natural spiritual affinity. Frank gets frustrated and asks what they will do now, thinking they were already screwed from the beginning of the plan. He questions how he can control his mana under pressure if he can't even call a basic spirit. Oscar reassures him, saying it's okay and that he has another way to solve the problem. In his thoughts, Oscar recalls the ancient spirit summoning ceremony, an ancestral ritual he learned when he visited the elf kingdom in his past life. At that time, the elves told him to try performing the ceremony. He tried it just for fun, without high expectations, but in the end he successfully performed the summoning. Confident, he concludes that it's impossible for a ritual that worked before not to work again now. Frank, confused, asks what they should do now. Oscar tells him to do nothing and warns that he will try the summoning himself. In his mind, Oscar thinks that, after so much time, the Spirit King must at least remember him. He starts focusing his mana and channeling his magical power. While concentrating, he reflects that his first summoning didn't happen in an empty training room like that one, but at the foot of the gigantic world tree, where he summoned his first spirit in the past. With the circle ready, Oscar calls out loud for the wind spirit. A light shines and the entity appears, asking if he is the human who called him there. The spirit comments, surprised, that this is the first time in 27 years that someone summons him. Oscar smiles and replies that their last encounter also happened exactly 27 years ago. Oscar gets straight to the point and says he wants to make a contract with him, asking if the spirit needs any offering in return. The spirit, recognizing the mage, says there is no need for all this formality, and what really matters is that their feelings are reciprocal. The spirit asks the human if he wishes to form a friendly and direct connection with him, Celestin, the most powerful wind spirit. To the total surprise of the spirit and also Frank, who was watching in the back, Oscar refuses the direct connection offer and says no. Oscar apologizes, saying he should have spoken earlier, but clarifies that he doesn't need a spirit for himself, and that he only called him there because Frank needs one. The next day, the scene shifts to the dueling arena. Frank Sirius approaches the White Tower's vice master and politely asks if he slept well. Hamill confirms yes, and says that, as always, he sleeps very well. Grant gets straight to business and says the vice master's presence there indicates he fully agrees with the terms of the deal made between the two parties. Hamill confirms the tower's backing but admits he had his initial concerns about Oscar's bet, deciding to agree only because the inventor of the Cadena flu cure is too stubborn. Grank, with a confident smile, points to the side and introduces the combatant who will fight for him today. The knight steps forward and formally introduces himself, saying his name is Lasley Morgan, an official level 5 knight. In response, Oscar steps forward and introduces himself simply as Oscar, a level 2 mage. Grank takes control of the situation and says he will explain the rules and details of the duel. He explains it is a simple method. Whoever grabs the opponent's necklace first wins the match. Furthermore, if 5 minutes pass without a definitive winner, they will accept defeat. Oscar says this is still very good, so they should start. Grank warns Oscar that he can raise his hand if he wants to suspend the duel. Then, he asks him if he will fight in those clothes, with that wide cape and loose sleeves. Oscar calmly replies that it's fine, because he won't be fighting today. At that moment, Frank approaches with his dueling clothes. This greatly surprises Grank, asking what Frank is doing there and what this means. Oscar says that he asked to prove his skills, but didn't say to fight personally, and he taught him a few things yesterday, so he will fight in his place. Grank says yes, it was his mistake putting him in the position of not fighting personally. But if he's hoping he will go easy because he chose Frank, he is mistaken. Oscar says that's not it, and he just thought a level 4 mage would have a better chance than a level 2. Grant asks what he means by level 4, since he was level 3 yesterday, so how is this possible? Oscar says that to turn Frank into one of the best mages in 2 years, he needs to show him this kind of skill. Grant tells Lasley not to go easy on his brother. The knight says yes. Oscar says that's fine then, and Frank shouldn't be afraid, and if he does what they practiced yesterday, he will surely win. Frank confidently says yes, stating he will return and win this battle. Now with the two facing each other, Lasley bows bows, saying it's been a while for his young master. While Frank says yes, and now they should start. After the signal, Frank already takes a few steps back, while Laszlo starts throwing his pressure onto the boy, scaring Frank a lot, seeing the immense warrior right in front of him, wondering what kind of pressure this is. And he has a lot of pressure at this distance even without using the key sword, and this is truly a level 5. And if he chickens out now, he will certainly be defeated. Oscar watches him trembling with fear, but he remembers Oscar's words from the other day, saying he needed him to bring the White Tower back to what it was before. After remembering this, he starts activating his magic more easily. Frank's strikes are being blocked by Laszlo, while he thinks he really improved. He was already doing double casts and even dissipated his momentum, and he wonders if maybe this is what it feels like to face the control technique used in the Eastern nation. But he thinks that even so, enough of just watching, and he charges at his young master at a very fast speed. While Frank thinks he is really very fast, and blocking this will be quite difficult. But even so, he activates the wind blade with a gigantic fist appearing in front of him, and Grant asks Oscar how he improved so much. While Grant says it's not like he's worried, but thinks he really improved a lot. But he sees Laszlo splitting Frank's magic in half, and asks himself if this is all he improved. And Frank is not the type of battle mage, and considering he is weaker than the others, his growth will harm him. And maybe a day will come where just getting hurt will be a relief, and it's better for him to stay at the company, where he won't be able to get hurt or worry the family. And the moment Laszlo was ready to attack Frank and grab his chain to end the fight, his brother concluded his thought, thinking that this way he will never be devoured by his own magic again. And so Oscar says it's over, which surprises Grank a lot, wondering why he is smiling and so confident. And now the scene shifts to last night, with Oscar saying that the spiritual transplant worked, but it's a pity the spirit is low level. But he asks how the wind god is, and it's better that they train now. But a very tired Frank thanks him, and says it activated naturally when he tried to hit him. And Oscar says he hasn't yet reached the level of transforming his body into wind freely, because after all, he hasn't fully overcome his trauma. And Frank asks if it's impossible to win tomorrow then. But Oscar says no, it is possible if he uses 100% of the wind god. And Frank asks what he means by 100% and what he's talking about. And Oscar asks him if he thinks the wind god will only transform his body into wind. And Frank asks if there's anything else. And Oscar says there is still the most interesting part of this spell, and that is the strongest part, unification. The ability to transform anything he touches into wind, whether it be clothes or objects. And this is the most absurd part of the wind god. And it's important to hide your cards until the last moment of the battle. And it's even more exciting when he wins a strategic battle. And Laszlo's strike simply passes through, and Frank slips past him very quickly, stealing his chain and winning the fight. While his brother up there screams that this is impossible, after he defeats Laszlo, even Frank can't believe he stole his necklace. He starts celebrating very happily, saying he really caught it. Meanwhile, his brother up there wonders if he really used the wind god and how this could happen. And even the healer said he wouldn't be able to use the magic again. The smiling vice master says the fight has come to an end and asks if Granch agrees with the result. He, excited for a second, just congratulates Frank. At this, Granch wonders if Oscar really only spent one day training his brother. He notices his brother greeting Laszlo and says he acknowledges his defeat. The vice master says they suffered coming all this way and asks if it isn't a pity they are leaving so early. But Granch says no and asks him to please take care of his little brother from now on. Granch stares at Frank and says he really grew up a lot. Frank asks what he means by that, but he just turns around and tells him to forget it, while Frank watches his brother. Oscar thinks he is really a funny guy, who is pretending not to have heard. The next day, Frank asks if this is really the entrance. Laszlo says yes, while Frank questions if that really looks like the entrance to the training room, saying it is obviously a prison, but Oscar says that it used to be a prison hundreds of years ago, so he isn't completely wrong. Frank, very surprised, asks what he did wrong above all and why he is going to train in isolation. Oscar says the vice master ordered this personally, and that this means he has great expectations for him. Frank asks what he means by great expectations, and questions why then they are sending him to train in isolation, given that he only managed to rest for one day. Oscar says he should look on the bright side, because he will need time to adjust to the spirit anyway, and that this is a chance to organize what he learned, now being a level 4 mage. Frank says it's true, but even so, he doesn't want to do this. Oscar just tells him to stop acting like a child, as he won't die in there. Frank asks if he is serious, and if he is going to open the door. Oscar just throws him inside, but mentally apologizes to him, because, to be honest, he was the one who asked the vice master for this. On the night after the duel, the vice master asked Oscar if he really wanted to put Frank in isolated training for 30 days, since he won the duel, and asking why he needed to go so soon. Oscar said yes, that he needed this. The vice master agreed, but said they would have to be kinder to him after a month. Oscar thanks him. The vice master says he has good news. The Sirius Trading Company says they can use their distribution network freely from now on, and on top of that, for free. This surprises Oscar, who asks what he means. He thinks Grank must have just finished doing the calculations, and it was fast. He thinks that as expected from a trading company, the profits the Sirius company will make if the White Tower rises again and Frank becomes a great mage would be countless. Grank's intentions are really clear, but Oscar feels a bit bad about this. Still, he tells the vice master that this is good news. The vice master changes the subject, saying he wants to ask something. If Oscar wants to teach. Oscar asks what he means by teaching, and thinks it's not like he could do that, but he keeps thinking that maybe he should want to and focus his attention on the potion department. He asks if perhaps there is a reason the White Tower mages need to get stronger in a short time. The old man says he is quick to understand and asks if he has ever heard of the Night of the Mages. Oscar says yes, while thinking that the Night of the Mages is an event where all the mages from each tower gather in one place. He remembers it was created to show their growth and harmony, and that the Emperor wanted this day to become a fraternization among the magic towers. But of course that wouldn't happen, and they just fight among themselves every time. Oscar thinks the event should have been cancelled after a few years, but wonders why the old man brought this subject up out of nowhere. He asks the old man if His Majesty is trying to re-establish the Night of the Mages. The Vice Master says yes, but that this hasn't been revealed to the public yet, and that the imperial family will announce the details in the new year. He hopes this is just the worry of an old man, but admits he is worried about the Black Tower. He explains that as long as the Black Tower keeps trying to be one of the 4 main magic towers, there is a high chance the White Tower will still be attacked. Everyone is doing well now, but even so, he is a bit uneasy. Oscar gets very serious and says he will definitely do it, which leads the old man to ask why he changed his expression all of a sudden. On the Magic Tower's 36th floor campus, Oscar keeps thinking that apparently the Black Tower is trying to come out on top. He thinks they are really arrogant and that the White Tower will only be kicked out over his dead body. He relieves himself thinking that at least he managed to push Frank to level 4 and that the low-level spiritual ceremony was a genius move. He was very grateful and wonders who would have thought the demigod would remember a measly human like him and keep her promise. The scene returns to the day before the duel, during the summoning. That spirit was asking who would be the spirit summoned to make the contract. Oscar just told him to calm down and spoke the words, Silafrion of Silence. He told the spirit to tell her that the white mage had returned. The spirit spoke defiantly, asking how he dared to say the Spirit King's name. But at that moment the spirit realizes something and asks who he is for a measly human to make the Spirit King herself follow an order. Oscar says it wouldn't be fun if he told him, and asks if he can or cannot do what he asked. The spirit says she allowed it, and that it won't be a contract, but a simple transplant. Oscar says that is enough, and thanks them. The spirit says she asked to tell him that he must not forget the promise, and that is what she said. Back in the present, Oscar just thinks she shouldn't worry, because he will guarantee the fulfillment of his promise. He reflects that it was thanks to her that he saved many White Tower families in the past, and that he will make sure to return the favor with interest. He grabs a paper taped to the door. It's the announcement for the White Tower Mage Eligibility Special Class. The content is about a reinterpretation of basic magic. Oscar thinks that, before all of this, he needs to take care of his family a bit more. In class, a mage says all those faces are familiar, and that he thought they had died, since he hadn't seen them in a long time. A girl says hi to him, while the mage comments to her that this is a class for those of level 3, but he doesn't see anyone above that in the room. Her friend says maybe it's because it's a basic lesson, but that all the intermediate mages are busy right now. Another friend in the back says it must be true that the White Tower has money now, saying the teacher was personally invited by the tower's vice master to give a lesson in the main building, where the Imperial Observation Seminar also took place. The friend, very excited, says the teacher must be someone impressive, and that she can hardly wait for it. In the back, a blonde mage tells them to shut up and complains that they are making a tremendous fuss just to use that auditorium that no one else uses. She is Demian Proud, the only daughter of the Proud County. The other mage says she is being too negative, and that they finally invested in something for them. But Demian counters that if it were really an investment, they would have prepared a high-level class like the other magic towers, and not a simple interpretation of basic magic. She tells them to look around. Out of the 32 people there, mostly only the low-level mages came. Demian claims that if it were such a good class, she is sure the geniuses above level 2 would also be there. To everyone's surprise, someone tells them to stop talking and activates the sound restriction, shocking everyone in the room. The mage thinks he can't speak or hear anything, as everything has been silenced. Everyone wonders who the teacher is, and if he is that level 2 boy. Oscar says he is sure several of them are disappointed that he is their teacher. The mages think that at least he knows this and wonder how it makes sense for a low-level mage to be their teacher, even if he is their senior. Oscar says that if they have any complaints, they can leave, as they are no longer students being controlled by their teachers. But instead of that, he imposes a condition. They must prove their skills by demonstrating they don't need to learn. He says they have 10 minutes, and within that time, they must manage to say out loud that they don't want to attend his class. Oscar smiles and asks if that isn't quite simple. And the seated students think that for sure this isn't simple, and if he really went crazy, and if he's really telling them to speak after doing that, but they think it's a test. Since they are level 2, he definitely can't silence them. They don't know what it is, but it can certainly be solved. And the girl in the back says that, in other words, he is saying they have to attend his class if they can't undo the spell. Oscar watches them, wondering if there is anyone skilled in there. He left some loopholes in the spell on purpose, but that doesn't mean it will be easy. They ask if really no one will be able to do it, and almost at the time limit, the boy in the back says he did it. Oscar thinks this boy was among the beginner mages, and that this must be Demian Proud, a brilliant but very stubborn boy, and so he congratulates him. The kid says it was easier than he expected, and then he got tangled up, trying to solve it slowly. After that, Oscar deactivates the magic and everyone starts talking again. He tells everyone to be quiet, saying the time is up and the only one one who passed the test was Demian Proud. Demian says that's obvious, and so he says that then he doesn't need to attend this class, and Oscar says yes, he can do as he wishes. Meanwhile, Demian thinks that letting him go like this is a bit problematic, and honestly, if the instructions were like that, he is curious about what they would really learn. But saying he wants to attend is a bit too humiliating. Oscar thinks maybe it's because he is a child, but he can see everything he is thinking. Oscar says he will give a prize since he was the only one to pass. He will teach him a spell, so he should come up there. Oscar asks what his favorite basic spell is, and Demian says it's the wind cutter. Oscar tells him to show it. Demian says it's a bother, shows the magic to him and asks if that's enough. Oscar says yes, and that was good, and today he will teach him the wind cutter. Demian asks if he couldn't see what is flying around him, but Oscar says that by his standards that is not the wind cutter, but rather a half-baked version, and there are two problems. First, this spell is not wind, and simply he destroyed it too easily, and asks what he thinks the wind is. Demian says the wind is air in motion. Oscar says that then, water is water, even when pooled, and fire is fire, regardless of shape. But wind is different. Wind is only wind if the air is in motion, in a constant flow, which surprises Demian. Oscar says that therefore what he did wasn't the wind cutter, and that, just as stagnant water rots, wind magic without a flow will easily lose its shape, and they must pay attention. The White Tower is a place that deals with the wind. In other words, their magic needs to be in a constant flow. If not, just as he showed earlier, it will end up being destroyed. And in this way, Demian asks what the second problem is. Oscar says there is a lot of mana being used unnecessarily. The moment he casts the spell, it would be very useful to reduce the amount of mana. The boy asks if he managed to notice that just by looking once, while Oscar thinks that when someone's magic reaches a certain stage, he can discover a lot just by seeing the opponent's magic. For example, their personality, their habits, and much more. And he says he might be a little intrusive, and says he is from a proud family, which has generated so many high-level mages for the White Tower. And he must have seen his family's magic growing up, and naturally must have tried to follow the same path. The wind cutter must be one of the spells he tried to copy, and if it was before learning to use magic properly, it must have been quite difficult to imitate the spell, since it's one of the most difficult basic spells. And while trying, he must have forced himself to succeed using more mana than necessary, and this is a habit that remained to this day. At least that's what he observed, which greatly surprises the boy, wondering how he knows that. Oscar says that since they discovered the cause, he could perfect the spell and handle it without problems. But it's a pity that this incredible student doesn't want to attend his class. Demian, embarrassed, asks who said he wouldn't attend, while Oscar watches him returning to his seat. And after 3 weeks, in a conversation between two mages, they ask if they heard the rumors that Oscar Crushen is an exemplary teacher, but others say that, at most, his classes will be useful for beginners. His friend says who knows, because some level 4 and level 5 friends of his went to watch his classes, and they discuss that maybe they also need to go. And the friend says that honestly, he was waiting for him to say that and now they should go there. The friend says they need to get in line early, because they won't even be able to see his class if they are late. The girl in the back watches everyone, and simply after hearing this conversation, everyone gets up at once and starts running there. And the beginner students wonder why there are so many people today, and there are even many level 4 and 5 seniors. Her friend says this is because it is still basic magic. But, to his surprise, right back there is Elder Maxim. And this no longer seems like an ordinary class, but a seminar from a magic academy. Oscar enters, says good morning to everyone, and says that the spell they will learn today is quite important, and it is very good that they came. The excited students get very happy. Oscar says it is the most important spell in a mage's life, which is wind, which makes everyone discouraged again, saying that then it is the basics of the basics, and that he is teaching a spell so basic that you can even learn it outside the magic tower. At this, Elder Maxim says he was just going to observe, but is very curious and needs to ask. He wants to know from Oscar if he is really going to teach just wind after gathering so many people. Oscar says yes, and asks the elder if he could demonstrate the wind. The elder says yes and shows them the wind magic, which surprises everyone. Oscar asks them if that is the wind, and not a gust or wind pressure. The students say it is as expected from the elder. The elder asks if it is enough, and Oscar thanks him. Then he asks Amy Raven to show her wind now. She asks why her, since there are several better ones. And she activates the wind magic. Everyone gets very calm with her light wind, and so Oscar asks if anyone knows the difference between the two spells. The students say it's strength, range, and temperature as well, and the girl in the back says it is the mana temperature. Oscar says Veronica Freeze is correct, which surprises the girl. And yes, as she said, the difference between the wind spells of Maxim and Amy Raven is the temperament of the mana that created them. He asks if that isn't fascinating. Despite the entire process being the same, from the spell's formation to its launch, one was as hot as a desert wind, while the other was as light as a spring wind. The difference is so great that it is difficult to consider it being the same spell. And then, he wants to ask everyone the question, who knows what mana temperature is? The student says he must be talking about the 4 types of mana: enhancement, acceleration, balance, and special. Oscar says those are the 4 mana systems, and that he is talking about temperament, which is a slightly different concept. To be exact, they are different concepts. But to understand mana temperament, they need to learn the roots of the White Tower, which in other words is balance. And he asks who can explain to him why the White Tower and the Blue Tower are considered representatives of balance. The student says it is because of their elements' characteristics. Oscar says that is correct. The Red Tower and the Golden Tower are strong and fast, but they lack harmony, and there is no cold fire or lightning in this world. However, wind and water can alternate between hot and cold infinitely, and this is the reason why they represent balance. However, there is a clear distinction between the Blue Tower and the White Tower, despite both representing balance. For example, here is water, and the conditions for water to boil are quite simple. Considering atmospheric pressure, they need a temperature of 100 degrees Celsius and a little time, which is quite simple. But on the other hand, creating hot wind is even simpler than boiling water. It assimilates much more easily with the environment, and its nature changes, being like a chameleon. And so they feel hot air in the back, and in the front, cold air. Oscar says wind is the most free element of all, and it can create a force as strong as the Red Tower's flames, and be as fast as the Golden Tower's lightning, or have a form as free as the Blue Tower's water. Besides, the Blue Tower's water doesn't mix with oil, but the wind has no such restriction, and depending on the mage's imagination, it is the only element that can have any temperature. Only the wind can be in harmony with anything in this world. Therefore, since the mages use the White Tower, they should review their opinions on the wind well. How they see the wind is the central point of today's lesson. And at that moment in the back, a student tries to talk to the elder, but the elder entered a unique state, murmuring about the wind. This greatly surprises Oscar, who tells her to wait. The elder starts asking himself what the wind is to him. While Oscar shouts for her not to touch him, the old man starts getting paralyzed, thinking about the wind. He goes to him and tells everyone to step back, because they cannot interrupt the elder's enlightenment. And the students say he was left doing nothing, but Oscar says he is awakening. At that moment, the elder feels something different, and after he opens his eyes, Oscar asks how he feels. The elder says he couldn't reach level 8, but still, it was very good, and he hugs Oscar and thanks him. The elder says that considering the situation, he should call him teacher now. Oscar says it's good to hear that, while thinking that thanks to him, his next classes will be easier, and now those below his level won't be able to attack him. And the biggest benefit of this is Veronica Freeze. He got the attention of one of the problem children listed in Oscar's diary. Now the next day, Oscar is walking, and thinks that Veronica said there was something interesting in the training room. Yesterday after class, she went to him and asked if he also trains, and he asked her if she doesn't use the TIFF room. She asks what he means by TIFF room, and gave him a look of contempt. While he keeps thinking she must have been excited because she liked the class, and he needs to know the reason why she looked at him with contempt again after he mentioned the TIFF room. He wonders if it's there, and heard that only 3 of the 300 training rooms are like this, and even the doors are different. He wonders why it's so special. As soon as he opens the door, he asks what the difference is. And maybe it's the vibe, but then a speaker says it is Argo, the next generation training support system. Oscar wonders if it's a room that uses magical engineering, which means the bastards from the Golden Tower must be making a lot of money right now. Argo says he will receive a customized training program after registering his user information, and asks if he would like to register, but Oscar says no. The system says the registration was refused, and he will be trained as an unregistered user, and asks him to please choose the training level he desires. This training program has 100 levels, and he can train according to his standards. Oscar tells it to start at level 1. 3 balls appear, and he must use physical or magical attacks to pop these 3 balls. But he doesn't wait for it to finish speaking and destroys all 3. He says that's not bad at all, and if this is level 1, then he would like to increase the level. Argo asks which level he desires. Oscar tells it to go to level 100. Argo starts sounding a warning, saying that from level 80 onwards, the ball's time decreases, and their speed increases significantly, and they become hostile towards the user. And if it is a pregnant woman, an elderly person, or a child, they are asked to please stop the challenge immediately. But Oscar is confident, and tells it to activate now, while wondering how incredible it must be for them to give him a warning like that. At that moment, something passes by him. Argo says that he must use physical or magical attacks to pop 1,000 balls, and the training will be cancelled if he casts a large-scale spell, and it will also be cancelled if he is hit more than 10 times. Oscar activates the wind cutter and starts breaking several balls. He wonders if it's just popping them and that's it, and at this rate his mana will run out, so it's best to use the minimum force possible. Several needles appear on the balls. He says it's more efficient this way, but he thinks that this surpasses the training level of the youths, and he keeps dodging the balls and popping the others. After a while, Argo congratulates him, saying he passed level 100. Oscar says that this is a nice warm-up, and thinks that then the mages of this generation do this kind of training since they were little, and the standard level for the mages of this generation must be much higher than before. So he needs to push himself harder, and also needs to eat right and build more muscle. As soon as he opens the door, he asks if she is going to train in the morning, staring at Veronica. She asks him if he thinks she came there to eat. She came to train. Oscar walks past her and says he just came for a visit, and his philosophy is that healthy mana comes from healthy bodies. She asks what he means by philosophy. Oscar wishes her a good training, and when she wonders if he ate something spoiled in the morning because he looks like a madman, as soon as she walks through the door, she thinks about that bastard who used to look down on her. Argo says it understands. She asks Argo if there were any changes in the current ranking. Argo says there were. She is very surprised and asks how, and tells it to show her. She stares at it. The first place is the character named AAA, completed level 100 in 9 minutes and 57 seconds, which surprises her a lot, asking who it is. But Argo says it cannot tell for personal security reasons. She asks if it was an elder, but those below level 5 are ranked, and he beat that in less than 10 minutes. She wonders if this isn't the first time in the whole continent. Argo says yes. Then she asks who it was, but Argo says it cannot tell for security reasons. She asks it if it was Oscar Crushin, but Argo says it cannot tell for security reasons, and she tells it to shut up. Oscar is leaving and wonders if perhaps he will be sore tomorrow, but while walking he bumps into Maxim and wishes him a good morning. The elder says he's right on time. He wanted to ask him something, and his daughter even said that the market merchants aren't buying the potions. Oscar asks what he means and why would that be. Maxim says that he thinks they are worried about the Blue Tower, and it is the center of potion production, so he thought he should know, but they can solve this. Oscar, pissed off, thinks that these bastards want to screw them over again. In the middle of the line they hear a conversation from two guys saying that mail 1A up to A5 on Bell Street. The extra says that from what he heard, they will raise their salaries starting today. Oscar wonders if these guys are the Wind Knights, and from what he just heard in their conversation, deliveries for sure are not a big business, and you need a lot of workers, but it doesn't yield much, and it's not political at all, so you can't gain power with it. And the only benefit of this is that you receive the best rating from the citizens among the Magic Tower's businesses. The worker says that they will continue working hard and have many good moments. His friend says that's true, and besides, when they help the elderly carry heavy things, they give them food for their work, which surprises Oscar a lot, asking for forgiveness for interrupting, but he wants to ask something. If they usually meet a lot of people when they make deliveries. The two say yes, and they need a signature to prove the items were delivered. Oscar happily says this was very useful and thanks him, and then starts running. He went to the Vice Master, and the Vice Master says that then he wants to use his Wind Knights from the delivery service to sell the potion door to door. Oscar says yes, exactly. The Vice Master says he understands, since the merchants aren't working, he wants to go straight to the consumers, but he asks if this isn't realistically impossible, and their potions are not for daily use. But Oscar smiles and says he can make new ones. Oscar says that there's no need to call it an innovation. There is a medium recovery potion from the White Tower with a great effect, and they can adjust the potion slightly to be divided into 4, depending on gender and age. Rapid bone growth, immunity, energy boost, muscle growth, increased elasticity, skin whitening effect, and pore strengthening. And they can set these as their main targets, and they can create them in a way that it is possible to consume repeatedly. And this way, the skin elasticity and muscle strengthening potions can be consumed together. As he speaks, he starts thinking about their names. After a few days, there's an old man sitting, saying that now he is old and has no more energy like in the old days. But then, one of the delivery guys goes up to old Graham. The old man says he arrived, and the delivery guy says it's a pleasure, and he received a letter today. The old man says that then his friend is still alive. The delivery guy says that they say this generation is the centenarian generation. And why would he die? The old man asks what he means, centenarian generation. And even he, an 80-year-old, is feeling his head and his body getting heavy. The delivery guy asks if he is hurt somewhere, but the old man says no, it's just that he doesn't have much energy. The delivery guy says then that's it, and he would like him to try something. The old man asks what it is. The delivery guy says that this is the newest creation from their White Tower, and it's a tonic perfect for him. And the tonic's name is Zero, and the old man asks what that means. The delivery guy says that this tonic is of utmost importance when it comes to the elderly. It strengthens your immunity, besides giving you more energy. The old man asks what would change for an old man like him drinking this, and the delivery guy says that many things. He asks if he knows old Miller from 2nd Street. He took this for a week and now says he is going hiking, which greatly surprises the old man thinking about it. The delivery guy says this tonic was personally created by Oscar Crushin, the White Tower's extraordinary genius. The old man says he's heard that name somewhere before. The delivery guy says yes, he is the mage who made the cure for the Cadena flu, which surprises the old man. He says it might be quite expensive, but the delivery guy says he will need 1 bottle per week, and the bottle costs 30 bells. The old man says he doesn't even think he'll be fooled by a new tonic, and those other two didn't have any effect, both from New Tech and the Blue Tower, and he no longer trusts pharmacists. The delivery guy asks if he really thinks he would bring him something that doesn't work, and of course not, and he also has an offer. The old man asks what he means by offer. The delivery guy asks if his address is in Surin, and there is a special event happening for Surin residents. If he he accepts the offer and gets a 1-year subscription, they will send 1 bottle of tonic per week, costing only 7.99 bells. And he can do an interest-free monthly plan. The old man says he can pay that if he cuts back on drinking and smoking. The delivery guy says they are giving the first bottle for free. The old man gets happy and tells him to give it to him right away, and that he should have said that earlier. And now, at night in his house, he notices that his body doesn't feel the same, and it is much lighter. He wonders if it's because of yesterday's tonic, and it was only with 1 bottle, and he can do all this. He goes to the square to talk to his friends, and the old men say it's been a while since they saw him, and that they thought he had passed away. But old Graham says he had to rest for a few days because of his aching body. After chess, his friends ask if he has been practicing chess, but the old man says no. It's just that his concentration is much better today. An old man says this guy must have taken something and had a good rest, and asks if his children brought an elixir. But old Graham says that, actually it wasn't an elixir. He took the White Tower's tonic. They ask what he means by tonic and if this isn't a scam, but the old man says no. He thinks it's true and asks them to listen to what happened to him. And now back to Oscar. Someone tells him they are in trouble. Oscar asks what they mean by trouble, and if the potion's rotted or something like that. But that mage says that this will happen at this rate, showing him a newspaper, saying that the Blue Tower is having a 50% off promotion for their potions. Oscar, surprised, says they are really cute, but she asks what he means by cute. Obviously they are trying to kick the White Tower out of the potion market, and they won't generate any profit at this rate, so why would they be doing this? Oscar says they wouldn't last long, at most 2 or 3 weeks, but she says that's almost a month, and they might not even be able to enter the market after a month because of this, and they should sell the Cadena flu cure and the tonics together. But Oscar says no way, and that is exactly what the Blue Tower wants. People would be furious if they used the Cadena flu disaster to sell potions, and then the Blue Tower would have justification to attack them, saying they are playing with human lives. So she asks if he is really going to let them take a beating like this. Oscar asks her if they have several potions in stock. She says yes, to the point they wouldn't even notice if 100 bottles were stolen. He says that's good. She asks what he means by good. Oscar says this is the recipe for the 0 tonics, and he asks if they could reuse the intermediate potions in stock as tonics. She asks if it's all of that, while he asks what's the point of keeping potions they aren't selling. And they will include several benefits. If a family buys more than 2 0 tonics, they will give a discount, and thus the economic barrier for large families will be reduced. But she says he is going to rely on discounts, and that these business ideas are scary. Meanwhile, Oscar asks her if possible they could pay an information guide to spread a rumor. She asks what kind of rumor he wants, and he, very excited, talks about the M0, and asks if she doesn't think it would be fun to spread the rumor that the tonic makes you more virile. She asks if that will really help sales. Oscar says to just wait and see that they will be sold in droves. And now, 3 weeks later, at the Blue Tower, that mage from before says it's done, and they are already completely finished. And the department head will be very satisfied with this. At that moment, someone enters. The Blue Tower's potion department head calls him Moira Main, and asks if he reads the news. Moira says not yet, but already gets the newspaper thrown at his head. The boss asks why he is smiling, and tells him to pick up the newspaper and read, and asks if this is really the best he can do, and if he gave up all the profits just to get this result. As he reads that the White Tower hits the bullseye with their tonics, and with 10 million bottles sold, the White Tower's 0 series is a popular product, and the M0 is a product for men due to its increase in virility, which now impressively is out of stock, and they are called the most effective tonics of all. And the White Tower continues to write a success story. While a mage wonders if this is really possible, and if they are selling tonics instead of potions, how did they do that? If they were out of the market, it's impossible he wouldn't know about it. He thinks damn it, and if so, of course they will appear in the aggregate sales volume. While Moira reads Oscar Crushen's statement, saying he was deeply moved after seeing the Blue Tower's actions, and so the White Tower promises to always keep their potions on sale. Moira starts saying this is a scam, and they were already going to sell at that price from the beginning. This way, the boss says the public wouldn't know that, and this bottle had never been sold before, and he asks if he kept staring at that chart thinking he was winning. And now, no matter what kind of pressure they try to put, it will be hard for the potion market to ignore the White Tower, since the public will want to buy their potions. Considering this, they are more or less there, and the boss tells Moira that he will be busy from now on. Moira asks what he means. The boss says he will have to recover the losses the Blue Tower suffered today, and not even working for free his entire life will be enough to compensate him. And now, on the eastern side of the continent, in the Ian dynasty, there is a great monster being attacked by several warriors. The monster is defeating several of them. In fact, the warriors realize they are weaker than the monster, and they ask what they should do. But, to everyone's surprise, someone says she found it, and appears out of nowhere in the sky, and tells them to return to their territory calmly now, if they don't want to be reduced to dust. And so she activates her innate magic, the tireless wind, and defeats the monster easily. She asks if this kind of thing keeps happening recently. The warriors behind ask if she is from the White Tower. She asks if the one in the center is Zhang Chun. He apologizes for his late introduction and says she is correct, he is from the Nine Dragons sect. And she takes off her cape and says she is Shasha, the White Tower master, Oscar's disciple. She asks if they brought what she asked for during the Nine Dragons sect. Zhang says yes, and this is the Empire's newspaper. She starts reading and is very surprised, saying that then the newspaper is full of articles about the White Tower tower recently. She thinks she's even afraid to read it. What if her tower went bankrupt in these 2 months she was absent, and if they were permanently expelled from their position? If that really happens, she could never see her master again even if she dies. But at that moment she opens her eyes and starts reading. She goes page by page and is very shocked, and asks if this is fiction, and if they really invented stories just so as not to make her upset. But Zhang says no. She thinks the rest doesn't matter, while wondering if the deliveries are going well. She didn't expect this business to be a success now. Actually, she started this business thinking it wouldn't succeed, and she had another goal with it. And she says alright, then she's leaving now, and asks them to please send the reward to the Imperial bank account. And she flies off at high speed, wondering what is happening with her White Tower, and that she needs to see it personally.